Chapter 591. Amidst Huang Liang's horrified gaze, wisps of black smoke sprayed out of Wuxia's 7 apertures, slithering into Manager Yu's body like poisonous snakes. The greedy look in Manager Yu's eyes turned into a warm smile as he cupped his fist and bowed to Wuxia and said, "Master." Huang Liang opened his mouth and let out a strange cry. But with a wave of his hand, Wuxia threw out a gust of wind and choked the cry back into his throat. With a faint smile on his face, Wuxia gave Huang Liang a look and said in a deep voice, "What are you panicking for? Even if you haven't seen the 7-orifice soul-locking curse, you should know about it." The 7-orifice soul-locking curse was a common technique used by the oracles of Diyu's Directorate of Celestials to control cultivators with low cultivation base. With the help of the power of ghosts, it would turn into poisonous smoke and invade the target's 7 apertures, confuse the target's mind and control his soul. Every year, many low-grade itinerant cultivators were controlled by the oracles with this technique, and sent to various itinerant cultivator powers, causing great losses to the itinerant cultivators. Of course, Huang Liang knew what the 7-orifice soul-locking curse was, but he never dreamed that Wuxia could also use it. He knew that Wuxia was a cultivator of both magic and fleshly body, but no matter how he looked at it, Wuxia looked more like a powerful warrior. He could not believe that he could even use a high-level curse related to the soul, such as the 7-orifice soul-locking curse. How strong was he exactly? Ignoring Huang Liang's nagging, Wuxia threw Manager Yu to the ground, and threw all the spirit herbs on the tea table to him. After that he clapped his hands and said with a smile, "All right, today is safe and sound. You bought a lot of spirit herbs from me with spirit talismans and knockout drops worth 100 mid-grade energy stones. Do you understand?" Shopkeeper Yu nodded and bowed. I understand. Patting Shopkeeper Yu's shoulder with satisfaction, Wuxia then said in a low voice, 3 days later, bring all the goods and valuables of the Yaoyu Pavilion out of the market and walk 300 miles westward to the mountainous area. Wait for me there, got it? Hide yourself well and don't get killed. He fished out a defensive bone talisman personally crafted by Yu Miao, pointed at it, and shoved the palm-sized talisman into Manager Yu's forehead. He smiled and said, "This treasure can save your life, but don't act recklessly just because you have a treasure to protect you." Shopkeeper Yu hurriedly promised, "Please rest assured, master. There will be no mistakes." Wuxia smiled pleasantly. From the shelves, he casually took some potions such as Smile of the Virgin and Chaste Woman, and a few powerful immortal talismans. After that he patted Manager Yu's shoulder, gave Huang Liang a wink, and strode out of the shop. Walking out of the door of the Yaoyu Pavilion, Wuxia burst into laughter and said, "Your Excellency Huang, this is indeed a good place. Ha ha ha. Where is the Drunken Fragrance Pavilion that Manager Yu mentioned just now? Let's go there and enjoy ourselves. TSK, we can't miss a female cultivator of nascent divinity realm. Can we?" When Huang Liang heard Wuxia say that he was going to look for those female cultivators who had been trafficked for fun, his eyes shone with a pink gleam. Laughing heartily, he said, "That's a wonderful idea. I'm very familiar with that place. Ha ha ha, I have to say, those girls who have cultivated are really tender, and I can even rub them with my hand. They are so much prettier than those common women." With their arms around each other's shoulders, they walked toward the Drunken Fragrance Pavilion. Along the way, all the cultivators cast sidelong glances at them, and some of the shopkeepers who were familiar with Huang Liang sighed inwardly. "Manager Yu has earned a fortune again. I can't believe that Diyu's military court can have someone as excellent as Huang Liang." Smiling, Wuxia entered the Drunken Fragrance Pavilion. He had left the bazaar, and it was a celestial fiend puppet who stayed in the bazaar to fool around with Huang Liang. Quickly he found a flying ship hidden amidst the clouds in the distance, and gave an order to the generals and oracles on it. 3 days later, Wuxia followed Reverend Yao Yu and the other immortals to kill the Green Dome Shark, while the armored soldiers and oracles on the 2 ships took the opportunity to break into Mount Moon Gazing and capture Reverend Yao Yu's entire clan, as well as all the immortals and itinerant cultivators in the bazaar. Wuxia told them frankly that he wanted to use these people as a blood sacrifice, and he did not mind giving some benefits to the generals and oracles on the ships. The generals and oracles were overjoyed when they heard that. They bowed their heads and were willing to follow Wuqi's orders. Time flew, and 3 days went by in the blink of an eye. Early in the morning, when the sun had just peeked over half of its face from the horizon, Wuqi saw over 30 beams of light shoot into the sky from Mount Moon Gazing, flying rapidly towards the depths of the ocean. He called out to Huang Liang and the others, then turned into a series of afterimages and sped away, following closely behind the more than 30 beams of light. 6 hours after Wuqi and those beams of light had left, 2 flying ships began to circle around Mount Moon Gazing. Led by groups of oracles, one after another, they alighted from the ships and landed on the ground, surrounding Mount Moon Gazing from all directions. Each group of armored soldiers was led by 200 or 300 men lieutenants, whose cultivation bases were as strong as heaven immortals. Such a force was more than enough to deal with all the itinerant cultivators on Mount Moon Gazing. But these armored soldiers did not launch an attack. According to Wuqi's order, they had to wait until Reverend Yao Yu and the others were engaged in a bitter battle with the Green Dome Shark, and only when they received the signal from Wuqi. Before that, they could not act rashly, because Reverend Yao Yu and the other immortals might return at any time. Only when these immortals were powerless could they break through Mount Moon Gazing in one fell swoop. Wrapping himself in the Shun energy unleashed from the spirit Shun Pearl, Wuqi transformed into a drifting cloud, and followed closely behind Reverend Yao Yu under the cover of the white clouds. When he rescued Princess Zhang Lu more than a month ago, Wuqi had memorized Reverend Yao Yu's appearance. Now he fixed his eyes on Reverend Yao Yu and paid no attention to the immortals around him whose cultivation bases were around the 30th tier. There was a total of 36 heaven immortals around the 30th tier, and it seemed that all of them were following Reverend Yao Yu's lead. Clearly, they were hired by Reverend Yao Yu to form a formation to deal with the Green Dome Shark, and none of them was as strong as him. After pondering for a while, Wuqi felt that it was reasonable. Every part of the Green Dome Shark was a treasure, and if he found a helper with a similar cultivation base as him, he would at least get a large share of the profits. However, Reverend Yao Yu only needed to give these heaven immortals a negligible compensation, and he could easily send them away by hiring 36 thugs whose cultivation base was far weaker than him to help him in killing the prey. While wondering what kind of formation Reverend Yao Yu would use to deal with the Green Dome Shark, Wuqi followed Reverend Yao Yu and kept teleporting for 12 hours. By the time the moon quietly emerged from the east, they had arrived in the depths of the ocean, above an archipelago that stretched for tens of thousands of miles. Mist was rising from the surface of the ocean, and thousands of oddly shaped islands dotted the surface, glinting with a faint silver light under the moonlight. Curiously, Wuqi exercised his chaotic divine eyes and glanced at these islands, the largest of which was only a few miles in circumference. Originally, they were made of ordinary rocks, but after years of being soaked by the essence of the stars and the moon, the rocks had become as lustrous as jade, and were a few times harder than steel. They had mutated into an extremely rare stone. The moon was now high in the sky, and the stars were twinkling in the sky. The thousands of islands down below were glittering like thousands of stars dotting the ocean, resonating with the light of the stars and the moon in the sky. For a moment, the world was filled with blue and silver light, which set off the dark purple seawater and the pale white mist. It was a magnificent scene, like a large bonsai inlaid in a crystal. Amidst the sea and sky, 37 heaven immortals, including Reverend Yao Yu, hovered in midair on clouds, each shrouded in an auspicious light. Each of them had the demeanor of an immortal, and a clear air was swirling around them. Their elegant temperament made Wuqi clap his hands and praise them. What a group of sanctimonious cannon fodder! Hurry up and help me deal a serious blow to that Green Dome Shark. Hiding in a cloud in the distance, Wuqi saw Reverend Yao Yu give a few orders to the heaven immortals. After that, all 36 heaven immortals took out a black net and a black flag, and after cupping their fists to Reverend Yao Yu, they transformed into beams of light and disappeared into the islands down below. Judging from the direction in which they landed, they were exactly in the direction of the 36 celestial dippers. Reverend Yao Yu looked up at the moon, then made a grabbing gesture. A white cloud rushed out from beside him, wrapped in hundreds of roasted cows, their bodies glistening with yellow fat. Reverend Yao Yu carefully fished out a red medicine bottle and smeared the liquid on the roasted cows. which were still emitting faint steam. A strange aroma wafted into the distance and drifted to Wuqi's side. Wuqi sniffed as Audiobook poked his head out from under his clothes. How wicked! Using drunken dragon incense? It's a turbid drunken dragon incense that has not been mixed well. Your father disdains to be fooled by this kind of lowly trash. Pressing Audiobook's head down and shoving him back into his clothes, Wuqi said in a low voice, "Take your time to digest Flaming Tiger's divine power. It has been so long, and you still have the face to show yourself when you haven't completely digested it? It seems that the recipe of this drunken dragon incense is wrong, and the quality is really bad. Next time, I'll get you some pure, high-grade stuff to eat, okay?" Audiobook's face turned slightly pale as he obediently squeezed back into Wuqi's clothes. On the surface of the ocean, Reverend Yao Yu threw over 100 roasted cows into the water. A strange aroma spread in the water and gradually seeped into the depths of the ocean. Time passed, and about 2 hours later, a large sheet of silver-green starlight suddenly emerged from the dark ocean. A huge fish, about 1,000 feet long and shaped like a shark, but with countless sharp protrusions on its skin, which made it look very ferocious-looking, slowly rose to the surface of the water. The fish was emanating a soft silver-green starlight, making it look like an extra-large light bulb. This was the green dome shark, an extremely rare primordial species. According to the Scroll of Stealing, every 360 years, the green dome shark would come to the surface of the ocean to absorb the essence of the stars and the moon, and when it had accumulated enough power of the stars, it would dive back into the deep ocean and sleep, gradually digesting the energy it had absorbed. During the 360 years of hibernation, if something attracted their attention, the green dome sharks would wake up from their hibernation to hunt for food. But at this time, the green dome shark's bloodline was not flowing smoothly, and its overall strength was at its lowest point. Especially when Wuqi looked up at the sky. Tonight was the time when the yin energy between the heaven and earth was the strongest. The yin energy would rush up to the sky, and the dark clouds would cover the light of the stars and the moon. The green dome shark would not be able to borrow energy from the stars, and its overall strength would be greatly reduced. As he watched the green dome shark gradually rise to the surface, Wuqi put his hand into his bosom and pressed on a turtle shell, secretly informing the people in the distance to get ready to strike. Below Mount Moon gazing, above the ocean, Wuqi was ready to strike. Chapter 592. The green dome shark, whose eyes had obviously not opened yet, opened its mouth and swallowed the roasted cows that were floating on the surface of the ocean. All the roasted cows were cooked by Reverend Yao Yu with all kinds of rare and expensive spices. They did not taste very delicious, but their aroma was strong enough to spread far away, and when mixed with the water, it was a great temptation to all kinds of aquatic creatures. If not for the presence of this green dome shark, perhaps all the big fishes and sea beasts in the ocean would have rushed over and devoured all the roasted cows. In the next moment, a huge mouth opened on the surface of the ocean, and hundreds of roasted cows plunged into it amidst the splashing of water. The green dome shark lazily devoured all the roasted cows, then burped lazily and spewed out a foul gas from its mouth. With a flick of its huge tail, it created a silver-green whirlpool on the surface of the ocean, and was about to sink back into the ocean to continue its slumber. Just then, a bright beam of light shot out from the top of Reverend Yao Yu's head, and a pearl about 10 feet in diameter shot whistling through the air and landed heavily on the green dome shark's head. A miserable howl rang out as the shark's head sank heavily into the water, sending a ring of water tens of miles high up into the air and spreading rapidly in all directions. Dozens of small islands were hit by the waves and shattered instantly, while huge rocks were carried hundreds of miles away by the waves. Mist rose into the air as water splashed down from the sky, producing a deafening rumble that sounded like a thunderclap on the surface of the ocean. The water splashed and fell onto the surface of the ocean, rocking the surface of the water, and the resulting wave threw the over 1,000 feet long body of the green dome shark high up into the air. A shrill roar filled with boundless rage burst out of its mouth, causing countless stars in the void to tremble. Starlight that was visible to the naked eye fell from the sky like raindrops and kept pouring into the shark's body. A large cloud rose from the bottom of the shark's body, holding it up in midair. The green dome shark slowly opened its eyes. No pupils could be seen in its eye sockets, as there were only 2 balls of blazing silver light in them. Suddenly, there was a flash of silver light as thousands of silver balls shot out of the shark's eyes and smashed toward Reverend Yao Yu like a thunderstorm. Suddenly, a huge iron umbrella, hundreds of feet in diameter, appeared in front of Reverend Yao Yu, spinning rapidly to block the silver rain of light. Deafening explosions kept ringing out. Every ball of silver light was a star ripple spirit-shattering thunder refined by the green dome shark's own alchemic fire, which contained a massive amount of star energy and the dark water essence of the deep sea. With each thunderclap, Reverend Yao Yu's body would be thrown hundreds of feet back, and the iron umbrella he used to protect himself would burst into a dazzling light, while a mottled mark would appear on the umbrella itself. Thousands of balls of star ripple spirit-shattering thunder exploded one after another, sending Reverend Yao Yu flying hundreds of miles away. The iron umbrella was torn to pieces, leaving only the handle and a few ribs intact. Reverend Yao Yu snorted coldly and threw the umbrella away. A bright light burst out of the pearl floating above his head, and suddenly, a very thin beam of blue light, as tiny as a silkworm, shot out of the pearl and landed on the green dome shark's head in a flash. A series of cracking noises rang out, and as soon as the blue light touched the shark, a large sheet of blue xianbing emerged from its body. In just the blink of an eye, the huge shark was frozen inside an iceberg that stood several miles tall. Reverend Yao Yu looked up at the moonlight, and an arc of light as thin as a hair shot out from between his brows, spinning rapidly and soaring into the sky. Large streams of moonlight flowed towards that beam of light like streams of water, while that beam of light let out a sharp buzzing noise. About 3 seconds later, the beam of light had absorbed a huge amount of moonlight and transformed into an indescribably thin green blade of light that was miles long and tens of feet wide. Moon slaughter, go! Reverend Yao Yu's eyes went wide like a toad's as he snapped and waved both hands forward. 2 streams of vigorous immortal energy poured out of his body and injected into the giant blade of light that was still wheeling in the sky. A blinding light erupted from the lightsaber, and it tore through the air for hundreds of miles before accurately striking the iceberg that was hovering in midair hundreds of miles away. In just a fraction of a second, the blade of light had wheeled and hacked at the iceberg thousands of times. The iceberg shattered with a boom, revealing the huge body of the green dome shark. A strong green halo enveloped the shark's body, and when the saber beam slashed at the green halo, it only caused a large amount of green smoke to splatter in all directions, but it didn't hurt the green dome star shark at all. The green dome shark. This was where the chill of the 2 words green dome came from. It was an ancient species that could absorb all kinds of poisonous gases drifting in the deep sea, including the poisonous gases accumulated in the excretions of other big fishes and sea beasts, the poisonous metals and stones emitted by various poisonous ores, the poisonous plants in the water, and the venom secreted by sea snakes and sea beasts. In short, it could absorb all the poisonous substances in the deep sea into its body and turn them into the green dome of myriad poisons to protect itself. Reverend Yao Yu's giant blade of light had hacked and slashed thousands of times on the green dome of myriad poison. The blade of light, which had been flying at an incredible speed, had become slower and slower. Before long, it was covered with mottled green marks, which made it look like a decayed bronze, and produced an unpleasant creaking noise as it flew. Reverend Yao Yu was shocked. He waved his hand and recalled the giant blade of light. Then, with a wave of his hand, the green moonlight on the blade of light suddenly disintegrated and revealed a dazzling gleam. Surprisingly, the gleam was also covered with a large amount of green poisonous gas. Amidst Reverend Yao Yu's shrill roar, the gleam was cut in half. The green dome of myriad poisons was extremely powerful, and it had completely destroyed Reverend Yao Yu's proudest weapon, the moon-killing blade. Wuxia was amused as he watched from a distance. He knew that the green dome shark was not easy to deal with. Although he coveted the beast's soul, it was too vicious. So he decided to let Reverend Yao Yu join the fight first. With his fingers clasped on the turtle shell, Wuxia was waiting for Reverend Yao Yu and the green dome shark to be completely bloodshot. And when Reverend Yao Yu could no longer escape, Mount Moon Gazing would strike. Evil creature, you're courting death. Reverend Yao Yu pointed a finger at the green dome shark and gnashed his teeth, his body trembling with anger. Although the moon-killing blade was not his prime immortal item, it was the defensive treasure he used to refine fiends when he attained the Tao. It had a very deep bond with him, and he had escaped from many disasters with the help of this treasure. As soon as they fought, the moon-killing blade was destroyed by the green dome shark. It made Reverend Yao Yu's heart twitch. Exasperated, Reverend Yao Yu let out a long cry, then suddenly transformed into a beam of light and sped toward the green dome shark. The pearl hovering above him unleashed streams of frigid water, which turned into a blizzard and swept toward the green dome shark. With a sway of his body, a bright light flickered in front of him as a palm-sized silver octagonal shield shot out a straight beam of light, colliding with the green dome of myriad poisons on the green dome shark's body, and producing a dazzling rain of light. In addition to the octagonal shield, Reverend Yao Yu was accompanied by a huge transparent creature that looked like a jellyfish. The beautiful creature, whose body was pale blue and body was about a few miles long, was hovering amidst the snowstorm. Her 18 tentacles were gently waving in the air, and from time to time, she would shoot out arrows made of cold gleams towards the green dome shark. The green dome shark let out a sonorous cry, and at the same time, countless tiny beams of starlight shot out of the countless bumps on its skin, turning into a shower of light that shot in all directions. Emitting a silver-green glow, the rain of light drew a large arc in the air, and shot toward Reverend Yao Yu at the same time like sentient creatures. The moon hung high in the sky, and the water rippled below. Amidst the hazy mist, a ferocious strange beast was fighting a Taoist who looked like an immortal. All sorts of light showered down from the sky, making the scene look like a dream. Sitting cross-legged amidst a white cloud, Wuxia observed the scene with his chaotic divine eyes. He could not help but take out a bag of pine nuts that were shrouded in natural energy, break them open one by one, and shove them into his mouth. There was delicious food, and there was beautiful scenery. It was the ultimate bliss. All of a sudden, Reverend Yao Yu let out a miserable howl as the octagonal shield in front of him shattered with a boom. Dozens of light showers sprayed onto his body like a storm, knocking him high up into the air. The dozens of holes on his chest were the size of mung beans, and faint black smoke kept spewing out of them. With his keen eyes, Wuxia saw that the skin and flesh on Reverend Yao Yu's chest were melting like snow under the sun. The green dome shark's poisonous gas was not to be underestimated, and Reverend Yao Yu's immortal body could not withstand its attack. Reverend Yao Yu sped up into the sky, looking like he was fleeing for his life. The green dome shark was ferocious by nature. After repelling Reverend Yao Yu, it paid no heed to the attack from the beautiful jellyfish-like creature. Braving the cold arrows, it soared into the sky and chased after Reverend Yao Yu. In the twinkling of an eye, the beautiful jellyfish-like creature spread its 18 tentacles at the same time, and pounced on the shark at lightning speed. The tentacles emitted a large sheet of electric arcs as they coiled around the shark's body. They looked as light and delicate as smoke, but in fact they were extremely tough. The 18 tentacles cut the green dome shark's skin like 18 steel blades, producing a sizzling noise while the electric currents scorched the shark's skin. Gradually, the tentacles sank into the shark's skin. The green dome shark cried out in pain, and the more it was in pain, the more it aroused its ferocious nature. It soared into the sky and pounced toward Reverend Yao Yu like a silver-green lightning bolt. Opening its mouth, it spat out large sheets of starlight and green smoke, shooting toward Reverend Yao Yu like a firework. Gritting his teeth, Reverend Yao Yu flew hundreds of miles into the sky, then suddenly cried out, "Fellow immortals, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for?" 36 heaven immortals rushed out at the same time, and threw the nets in their hands into the sky. Immediately, the sky turned dark, and the void within 1,000 miles was completely shrouded in darkness. As they waved the flags in their hands, a chilly wind rose from the ground, and countless skeletal fiends rushed toward the green dome shark fearlessly while shrieking and shrieking. The heaven immortals roared with laughter as they disappeared into the dark smoke and chilly wind at the same time. Wuxia rose to his feet excitedly. Reverend Yao Yu had used the formation, and there was going to be a good show. Chapter 593. The green dome shark was indeed an ancient species with a very powerful innate divine ability, and its cultivation base was even a few levels stronger than Reverend Yao Yu. As a result, Reverend Yao Yu had destroyed 3 immortal items in a row, and even his supreme treasure of fiend refinement was destroyed by the green dome of myriad poison. But the green dome shark also had a great weakness. It had to rely on seawater to survive, and once it was out of the water for a long time, both its physical strength and magic power would decline. When a green dome shark was out of the water for more than 6 hours, its combat strength would be no different from that of an ordinary lower-tier immortal. No matter how strong it was in the past, once it was out of the water for more than 6 hours, it would become an easy target to be slaughtered. In this dark space, the gravity was forcibly twisted by the magic power of the formation, and a strong suction force came from all directions. Those who were trapped in the formation could not tell where the sky was and where the sea was. For the green dome shark, who was eager to rush out of the formation and return to the sea, it was very likely that it had gone the wrong way. But Reverend Yao Yu would not give it the chance to return to the sea. Even though the green dome shark's cultivation base was a few levels stronger than him, and was almost as strong as a top-tier heaven immortal, how could Reverend Yao Yu be unprepared when he came here to kill it? A sharp whistling sound towered into the sky as a wheel of blades appeared over Reverend Yao Yu's head. It was more than 1,000 feet in diameter, with a shaft several feet thick in the middle, and thousands of razors as thin as cicadas' wings on top and bottom of it. As soon as the purple gold wheel of blades appeared, a pressure that made one tremble came crashing down. The green dome shark trembled as it stared at the huge wheel in horror. A hazy glow surrounded the wheel, and each of the razors was surrounded by 3 to 5 runes the size of a water tank. A vast and murderous aura kept spreading out of the wheel, so strong that even Reverend Yao Yu could not bear it. Wuxia, who had sneaked into the formation to watch the battle, sucked in a cold breath. His eyes shone as he stared at the huge wheel of blades, and he nearly spat saliva out of his mouth. This was a gold immortal artifact, and there was no doubt that it was a gold immortal artifact used by a gold immortal. Although its grade was not high, about the standard of an 18th grade golden immortal instrument, its power and ingenuity were worlds apart from a heaven immortal instrument. The aura emanating from this gold immortal item made Wuqi's hair stand on end even though he was hundreds of miles away. Looking at the huge wheel, Wuqi's eyes were filled with blazing heat. Unfortunately, Wuxia also knew that gold immortal artifacts were not something that he could use right now. Although his fleshly body had indeed reached the level of a first-tier heavenly immortal, his magic power and divine abilities were still far from reaching that level. Shaking his head helplessly, Wuxia turned his attention to the battle. Sensing that something was wrong, the green dome shark howled and charged in a random direction. Even Wuxia could not help but smile wryly for the unlucky shark. The formation had disturbed the gravity, making it impossible to tell where the sky was and where the earth was. The poor fellow had chosen a direction that was the furthest away from the ocean, and it was flying straight into the sky. The 18 tentacles of the jellyfish clinging to its body kept entangling it, slowing down the shark's flying speed. Gusts of chilly wind kept blowing at it from the formation, slowing it down as well. Amidst the chilly wind and black smoke, countless bony fiends flew up, baring their teeth and slamming into the shark like a meteor shower. Every time they slammed into the shark, the speed of the shark slowed down a little. There were countless fiends in the formation, howling shrilly as they kept pouncing at the shark. The thick layer of green dome of myriad poison around the shark's body was corroding these fiends' bodies, melting their bones and turning them into specks of dust. However, there were just too many fiends coming at it. The formation spanning 1,000 miles in diameter was filled with these bizarre-looking, bony fiends. When 1,000 fiends were corroded, 10,000 came charging at it. When 10,000 fiends were corroded, 100,000 came charging at it. When 100,000 fiends were corroded, 1,000,000 came charging at it. It was unknown which outer space the formation had communicated with, but countless fiends came roaring and charging at the green dome shark without any regard for their own lives. A quarter of an hour later, a huge ball of bones, about 100 miles in diameter, had formed around the green dome shark. Countless fiends were wriggling, roaring, and scratching at the shark's body with all their might. Shrill cracking noises lingered in the air. As the ball was too heavy, some of the fiends were crushed into pieces by their companions. The bone fragments piled up on the fiends and gradually melted into their bodies like flowing water. Gradually, some of the fiends that absorbed the bone fragments grew larger and larger. In just a quarter of an hour, the number of fiends in the ball had been reduced by 100 times, but the size of the remaining fiends had also increased by 100 times. The jellyfish, which was shooting out powerful electric bolts, kept entangling the green dome shark. The jellyfish did not have a corporeal body, but a body composed entirely of electric currents and cold air. It completely ignored the terrible damage inflicted by the green dome of myriad poison, and focused on binding, entangling, and strangling the shark. It was crazily tearing the shark's body and dragging it toward the fiends. The fiends, who had grown larger, reached out their sharp claws and tore the shark's body madly, bringing up large amounts of sparks and starlight on its tough skin. The green dome shark let out a shrill and unpleasant howl. It sensed the impending crisis, and it could not wait to break out of the formation. But the formation was extremely bizarre, and it was designed to target the shark's weakness. So how could it break out in a short time? At this moment, its flying speed was so fast that even an ordinary mortal old lady could walk faster than it. How long would it take to rush out of this 1,000-mile wide array formation? Reverend Yao Yu hovered in midair. He had consumed a few pills to temporarily stop the green dome shark's poisonous gas from attacking his body, and had focused all his energy on the huge wheel of blades hovering over his head. The purple gold wheel was spinning slowly as he performed an incantation gesture and recited an incantation, constantly injecting his immortal energy into it. It was a gold immortal item, and he could not control it at all. He could only rely on incantation gestures and hand incantation gestures to drain his immortal energy and blood essence into it. Wuxia narrowed his eyes as he looked at the huge wheel of blades. The purple gold wheel was glinting brilliantly and full of spirituality. It was a gold immortal item with an owner. In other words, its owner was somewhere on Pangu continent, and Reverend Yao Yu was just borrowing it for the time being. Reverend Yao Yu kept performing incantation gestures and incantation gestures, so he should have learned the incantation and incantation gestures from the original owner of the wheel. But, even if he had learned the method, it was still not something he could control in a short time. Judging from the way things were going, he would not be able to control the gold immortal item to attack the enemy for him in less than an hour. Shaking his head, Wuxia murmured under his breath, "The green dome shark is not so easy to deal with. It's true that its body is full of treasures, but if you want to get those treasures, how can you do that without paying some price? TSK, who cares? All I want is the green dome shark's true soul, and you just have to kill it. What does the rest have to do with me?" The wheel began to tremble, and its terrible aura grew stronger. Wuxia felt a suffocation in his chest, and he could not help but take a few steps back. The green dome shark, who bore the brunt of the attack, could sense the terrible killing intent coming from the wheel. The unlucky fellow roared at the top of his lungs, and the green dome of myriad poisons around him retracted into his body. All the skeletal fiends leaped inwards and plunged their sharp claws deep into the shark's body, causing a great amount of green blood to spray out of the wounds. A shrill cry rang out as the shark's body expanded rapidly, from over 1,000 feet long to 100 miles long. After a series of battles, the slumbering green dome shark had finally awakened from its deep sleep, and it had mustered all its strength to return to its original form. The huge horny protrusions on its body let out a sharp whistling sound, and a large amount of green gas shot out like countless arrows, blasting those huge white bone fiends into pieces. White bones flew all over the sky, and soon, they turned into rotten dust in the green gas and fell to the ground. The jellyfish tied to the green dome shark let out a miserable hiss as its tentacles were broken by the shark's suddenly expanding body. Then, a dazzling beam of starlight shot out of the shark's mouth and blasted the jellyfish into countless drifting electric arcs and cold air fragments. The shark opened its mouth and gave Reverend Yao Yu a ferocious, human-like smile. The green smoke and starlight flickered all over its body, and gradually condensed into a huge ball of light several miles in diameter next to its mouth. This was the strongest attack of the green dome shark, the moon-shattering star spirit dispersing thunder. Every strike would consume half of their energy. Ordinary immortal items could not defend against such a powerful attack. Cold sweat kept oozing out of Reverend Yao Yu's forehead. He had never dreamed that this big fellow could be so fierce and savage. Seeing that the green dome shark was about to spit out the thunderbolt, he quickly bit the tip of his tongue and spat out 3 mouthfuls of his prime blood essence. 3 blinding beams of blood-red light were injected into the wheel, and it moved abruptly. Finally, the gold immortal item had absorbed enough immortal energy, so it began to spin rapidly. For a moment, the only sound that could be heard was the sound of blades tearing through the void. But as the saying goes, the loudest sound is louder than the loudest sound. When Wuxia heard the loud noise, he could not describe what it was. He could only watch as the wheel spun rapidly, and the surrounding void was stirred into a mess by the thousands of huge blades on it. The thunderbolt shot whistling out of the green dome shark's mouth, and at the same time, the wheel plunged down with a dazzling beam of golden light. The thunderbolt was drawn into the wheel, and a loud boom rang out as it bounced tens of miles up into the air. The thunderbolt exploded, and Reverend Yao Yu was hit by a stray thunderbolt, leaving a fist-sized hole in his chest. He howled miserably as he was thrown tens of miles away. Then the wheel fell rapidly, slicing through the green dome shark's body in just a flash. A miserable howl rang out as the wheel turned into a beam of golden light and shot into the sky, disappearing without a trace. The green dome shark hovered in midair. Half of its body had been cut into pieces, and its body was riddled with deep wounds, each about a mile long. Large amounts of green blood were spraying out of the wounds, and the shark was nearly cut into pieces. At that moment, the surrounding heaven and earth suddenly shook. The natural energy towered into the sky, completely blocking out the moonlight and starlight, while dark clouds covered the entire land. Today was the time of extreme and the natural energy had blanketed everything. Chapter 594. The green dome shark let out a shrill cry. It had been more than 2 hours since it had left the water, and now, it was at the end of its tether, hovering in midair with half of its broken body, its eyes glinting with dazzling starlight fixed on Reverend Yao Yu. It was ready to fight to the death. But the energy in the air was so strong that it had overshadowed the light of the stars and the moon. The power of the stars in the void was decreasing rapidly. The green dome shark opened its mouth wide and sucked crazily, but it could not absorb even a tiny bit of the power. The green dome shark, which was severely injured by the gold immortal artifact, and had little energy left in its body, was at a loss. It could not figure out what was going on. Why did the power of the stars that flowed like water around it disappear completely? Reverend Yao Yu, with a large hole in his chest and covered in blood, slowly descended from the sky. Staring fixedly at the green dome shark, he laughed in a deep voice and said, "A beast will always be a beast. Even though your cultivation base is much higher than mine, you still fell into my hands. Hee, all the treasures you have are very valuable. Especially that crystal core of yours, hee." The green dome shark took a deep breath, but the air it inhaled quickly gushed out from the broken part of its body. It did not even have the last bit of strength left in its body to move. It was already very lucky that it could survive the violent attack from a gold immortal artifact. The last bit of strength in its body was slowly draining away, flowing out of its body along with the little blood that was left in its body. Staring at Reverend Yao Yu with hatred, a crisp cracking sound suddenly rang out of the green dome shark's body. Reverend Yao Yu's face fell. "How dare you, evil creature?" he growled at the top of his voice. "Spit out the crystal core, and I'll spare your life. But if you dare to break it, I'll capture your soul and send you to the 9 nether hell to suffer the endless torture." The green dome shark's body slowly shrank, and a strong green gas, starlight, sprayed out of its body. After losing the last chance to strike, the ferocious green dome shark burned all its blood essence, preparing to self-detonate and perish together with Reverend Yao Yu. And when Reverend Yao Yu told it that his target was its inner core, it actually mustered the last bit of its strength and was gradually crushing its inner core, which was the strongest and also the source of all its power. Hiding amidst the chilly wind and dark smoke, Wuxia looked at this big fellow with satisfaction, who would rather die in glory than live in dishonor. "Burn, let all of your blood essence burn. Shatter the crystal core, and burn it along with all the blood essence." When all the remaining energy in the body was burned, the soul of the green dome shark would reach an unprecedented peak. At that time, the green dome shark's body would shatter, and the soul would be captured. The beast's soul obtained would be the perfect green dome shark beast soul. On top of that, the sentience in the beast's soul would also be shattered by the huge impact of the energy. A beast's soul like this, which had retained the instinct to strike a final desperate blow before death, but had lost its sentience, leaving only an instinctive ferocious aura, was perfect to be refined into the item spirit of an immortal item. Wuxia's face twisted and gradually turned into the appearance of a weathered old man. He gently rubbed his hands, and there was a vague chaotic light flickering between them. The green dome shark's body was shrinking rapidly, and gradually, it was only about 10,000 feet long. The light shooting out of its body was getting stronger and stronger, and gradually, there seemed to be a tiny shadow of a green dome shark, about a foot long, looming over its head. Reverend Yao Yu was so anxious that he almost coughed blood. "Fellow immortals, I'll double the reward I promised," he cried out sternly. "Kill this evil beast's body and take out its inner core. Don't let it self-detonate. Otherwise we'll all be in big trouble." The self-detonation of an ordinary nascent divinity cultivator could destroy everything within 100 miles. The green dome shark's cultivation base was similar to that of a peak-level heaven immortal, and if it were to detonate its body at all costs, the power would be enough to shatter the stars in the sky. Reverend Yao Yu could escape with his mighty cultivation base, but none of the 36 heaven immortals present would be spared. Amidst Reverend Yao Yu's howl, 36 panicked heaven immortals emerged from the black smoke. They raised their swords at the same time, and with a shrill whistle, 36 immortal swords slashed through the air toward the rapidly shrinking green dome shark. At the same time, they began to chant incantations and perform incantation gestures, unleashing all kinds of immortal thunders that contained fire, water vapor, golden light, and cold light. Immortal thunders of different attributes and powers smashed down toward the green dome shark like raindrops. The green dome shark let out a continuous cry. It paid no attention to the attacks of these heaven immortals, focusing on burning its blood essence and crushing its inner core, getting ready to fight Reverend Yao Yu to the death. If these ancient mutated beasts had not cultivated into a human form, their intelligence would not be very high. Right now, this big guy was only thinking about risking his life. How could he care about the sparks and flesh splattering all over his body from the explosion? Accompanied by a shrill cry, the green dome shark grew smaller and smaller, causing the heaven immortals to scream in fear. The smaller the green dome shark was, the more likely it would explode at any time. Now that it had shrunk to less than 1,000 feet, who knew when it would explode and take away the lives of everyone present? Reverend Yao Yu clenched his teeth so tightly that blood was oozing out from between his teeth. "Evil creature, you are indeed an evil creature," he cried out sternly. Reverend Yao Yu pointed his finger out, and the 10 feet in diameter pearl hovering over his head burst into a bright light. "If you don't hand over your inner core, I don't want to live anymore," he bellowed furiously. Reverend Yao Yu was so angry that he could not even speak properly. He held the pearl with both hands, and a large amount of golden blood kept gushing out of his palms and slowly flowing into the pearl like smoke. After being nourished by Reverend Yao Yu's blood essence, the pearl had gradually shrunk like the green dome shark. In just a few seconds, Reverend Yao Yu's face had turned pale like a zombie. His body was shivering, and the pearl had shrunk to the size of a bowl, emitting a cold gleam that even Wuxia could not look at with his chaotic divine eyes. The green dome shark fixed its eyes on Reverend Yao Yu, and Reverend Yao Yu stared back at it. The man and the shark were like lovers who had not seen each other for 10,000 reincarnations, staring at each other with an unforgettable look, as if they were trying to brand each other's appearance deeply into their souls. The 36 heaven immortals kept howling and hacking at the green dome shark's body with their immortal swords, each bringing forth a great deal of blood. Countless immortal thunders smashed down like raindrops, smashing the green dome shark into a bloody mess. But the green dome shark did not make a sound at the moment, just staring at Reverend Yao Yu, just as Reverend Yao Yu was staring at it. Wuxia nodded. He pulled out the turtle shell from his pocket, and a wisp of mist shot out of his fingertip and slowly fused into it. He had informed the soldiers and oracles at the foot of Mount Moon Gazing that they were ready to strike, as all of Reverend Yao Yu's spirit was attracted by the green dome shark. The green dome shark took a deep breath. Its body had shrunk to only about 10 feet long. A dense cloud of silver and green smoke had wrapped around it, and it was constantly being absorbed into its body. The pearl hovering over Reverend Yao Yu's head had shrunk to the size of a thumb. At the moment, it had lost all its light, and there was only a hazy mist hovering around it, making it look hazy and blurry. A fist-sized pale green spirit orb slowly emerged from the top of the green dome shark's head. The orb was covered with countless cracks, and it was its inner core. The shark had tried its best to suppress it, but as it was severely injured, it could no longer completely crush the core. Therefore, it threw the core out of its body, preparing to use it as a magical treasure to attack the enemy. No matter what, it had to fight Reverend Yao Yu until both of them were severely injured. Reverend Yao Yu stared fixedly at the core, gritted his teeth and said, "Evil creature, how could you hurt my treasure like that? You deserve to die 1,000 times over." Before his voice could fade away, a golden cicada the size of a finger suddenly flew out of his belt, its thin wings flapping rapidly and letting out a shrill, unpleasant cry. Reverend Yao Yu, who was concentrating on circulating his energy and preparing to fight the green dome shark, was startled by the cry and nearly coughed up a mouthful of blood from his nostrils. He stared at the cicada, which he had given to his descendants as a messenger in times of crisis, and heard the shrill cry. Only he knew the meaning behind it. A powerful enemy was attacking the mountain, and his clan would be wiped out. Reverend Yao Yu howled at the top of his voice, "Who is it? Who is so bold? How dare you attack my Mount Moon Gazing?" Taking advantage of the moment when Reverend Yao Yu was distracted, Wuxia rushed out. He did not even bother to look at those lower-tier heaven immortals. With both hands locked into a strange incantation gesture that looked like a goat's horn, he pressed it hard on Reverend Yao Yu's back. Wisps of phosphorescence rushed out of his fingertips and plunged into Reverend Yao Yu's back. Reverend Yao Yu howled miserably as a cracking sound rang out from his spine, which was nearly broken by Wuxia. An enormous amount of energy rushed into his body and interrupted the flow of immortal energy in his body. "Green Dome Shark, I'll gladly accept this treasure." Wuxia squeezed out a hoarse voice and laughed strangely. Reverend Yao Yu gave a furious roar as he waved his hand backhandedly, sending out a sword beam that pierced the foreheads of all 36 heaven immortals present. Then he uttered a sharp incantation, and the bodies of all 36 heaven immortals exploded with a boom, as if they had mustered all their immortal energy and immortal souls. Amidst the deafening explosion, Reverend Yao Yu shot up into the sky in a beam of light and cried out, "Old fool, I'll pay you back 10,000 times for what you've done today." With a flicker of his body, Reverend Yao Yu abruptly teleported away. The enormous stream of energy that Wuxia had poured into his body just now obediently followed Reverend Yao Yu's teleportation magic and helped him travel a great distance with ease. Looking at Reverend Yao Yu, who was fleeing with severe injuries, Wuxia murmured, "Run, run as far as you can. Don't let those fellows take all your wealth for themselves." Laughing strangely, Wuxia waved both hands and shattered the shockwaves produced by the self-detonation of 36 heaven immortals. Then he threw a punch towards the green dome shark, who was dumbfounded. The punch hit the green dome shark's head and smashed its broken body into pieces. Grabbing the shark's soul, Wuxia was about to throw his head back and laugh when a suffocating pressure suddenly came whistling toward him from the sky. Wuqi's expression flickered as he cried out in alarm, "Damn it! A gold immortal?" Before he could give the shark's soul a good look, Wuxia hastily turned into a wisp of smoke and fled. Chapter 595. When he was far away, Wuxia quickly turned his head back to look at the spot where Reverend Yao Yu and the green dome shark had fought desperately. A huge wheel of blades was hovering in the air, emitting a dazzling purple-gold light. A skinny white-clothed Taoist was standing on top of it, muttering something in exasperation. Wuxia nodded. Reverend Yao Yu was really unlucky. He knew very well that the gold immortal item he used to severely injure the green dome shark must have been rented through the internal channel of Myriad Immortal Alliance. Wuqi wondered how much he had paid to rent the gold immortal item for the chance to strike the shark with all his might. After the strike, the gold immortal item quickly turned into a beam of light and sped away. The white-clothed Taoist must have completed the transaction and taken it back. Clearly, the Taoist had smelled the aura of the green dome shark from the Wheel of Blades. He knew that it was a rare ancient species, and its body was full of useful treasures. That was why he came here on his magical treasure. But it was a pity that Reverend Yao Yu had fled in panic, and Wu Qi had taken away the most precious soul of the green dome shark, leaving him with only some broken fleshly body fragments. The green dome shark, which had burned all its blood essence and its inner core, did not leave anything good behind but a pile of ashes. If this gold immortal of Myriad Immortal Alliance was interested, he could bring the ashes back and worship them. With a malicious smile on his face, Wu Qi sped away. He now had a greater understanding of Myriad Immortal Alliance. As long as he was willing to pay a certain price, not only could he hire powerful immortals to help him kill and avenge himself, he could even rent a gold immortal item. He wondered if Myriad Immortal Alliance could rent a primordial immortal item from a primordial immortal. Perhaps no one could afford to pay such a high price, right? With all sorts of strange thoughts running through his mind, Wu Qi streaked across the void with a faint layer of Shen energy, and before long, he had returned to Mount Moon Gazing. The once bustling Yao Yu Immortal Market had turned into a sea of fire, with thousands of corpses of immortals and itinerant cultivators lying on the beach. All the buildings were engulfed in flames, and shrill cries could be faintly heard coming from within the sea of fire. Those were the civilians hired by the Celestial Market, struggling and crying for help. Dozens of armored soldiers were walking back and forth outside the Immortal Market. From time to time, they would shake their hands and throw a few large fireballs at the buildings that were not very badly burned. The powerful immortals and itinerant cultivators had all been slaughtered by the armored soldiers, leaving only tens of thousands of civilians in the market. They were either shopkeepers, waiters, or even brothels prostitutes. These people simply had no power to resist the fire released by the spell. They could only howl a few times in the sea of fire before being burned to ashes. The bodies of these people were gradually melted into fat by the fire, and mixed with the collapsed pillars, which made the fire even more intense. In the black smoke, one could vaguely see the souls of the dead flying helplessly into the sky, helplessly looking at the void distorted by the heat of the fire. Not long after, dozens of whirlpool-like black doors suddenly appeared in the void. A powerful suction force came from these doors, sucking these souls in. They were the emissaries of hell, who had come to receive the souls of the dead. Wu Qi looked curiously at these black doors. It was the first time he had seen what the people on Panga continent looked like after they died. He had fought many battles on Panga continent, but he had never encountered an opportunity where a large number of souls could survive. What surprised Wu Qi was that several of these black doors were glowing with a pale golden Buddhist light, and he could vaguely hear deep chanting coming out of them. Through the chaotic divine eyes, he could vaguely see figures shrouded in a Buddhist light behind the doors. As the deep chanting echoed, hundreds of souls among the mortals who had been burned to death floated happily toward the few doors that were glowing with Buddhist light. Several pitch-black doors emitting shrill ghost howls blocked the way of the souls who were chanting Buddhist mantras, bent on sucking them in. But very fine beams of light immediately shot out of the few doors that were glowing with a faint Buddhist light, and smashed heavily onto them. Wu Qi heard faint cries of rebuke and misery coming from the void as the doors shattered with a boom, and hundreds of souls who were chanting Buddhist mantras flew safely into them. TSK, there is a back door of the Buddhist League in hell? Wu Qi looked at the scene in horror, thinking that he would have to find out more about it later. If the cultivators of the Buddhist League were really so powerful, he would have to be careful. After all, he had once offended the disciples of a great bodhisattva and killed many of his disciples. The strange phenomenon lasted less than the time to finish a pot of tea. After tens of thousands of souls were sucked into the doors, the black doors gradually disappeared, and the last skyscraper in Yao Yu Immortal Market collapsed. The huge main beam smashed to the ground and sent up countless sparks. The twisting flame illuminated Mount Moon Gazing off to the side. From time to time, various thunderbolts and lightning bolts burst out from the vast mountain, while muffled booms of explosions kept ringing out. led by dozens of captains whose cultivation bases were as strong as heaven immortals. Hundreds of heavily armored soldiers were hovering in midair, attacking a defensive barrier around a few pavilions on top of Mount Moon Gazing. Meanwhile, hundreds of oracles were hovering in midair, raining down thunderbolts, lightning bolts, wild winds and fire spells. Apart from strange and unpredictable curses, oracles of the human race were also proficient in all kinds of natural attacks of the 5 elements. Hundreds of oracles were like hundreds of mobile turrets. With a wave of their hands, a great number of thunderbolts would fall, and with a slight cough, dozens of fireballs, each measuring about 10 feet in circumference, would tumble down from the sky. If 3 to 5 oracles joined hands to launch an attack, they could casually throw large meteors down from the sky, shrouded in scorching flames. Compared to the immortal spells of immortals, the power of each wave of attack from oracles might not be as powerful as that of immortals, but the frequency of their attacks was too high. Immortals often had to perform incantation gestures and incantation spells for a long while before they could unleash a single immortal thunderbolt, but oracles could unleash a storm of attacks with just a wave of their hands. Quantity made up for the difference in quality. Hundreds of oracles attacked at the same time, enveloping the entire peak of Mount Moon Gazing with fiery light, and causing the once stable defensive formation to tremble violently. Meanwhile, hundreds of armored soldiers hovered in midair, wielding heavy blades, spears, swords, and halberds, and smashed at the defensive formation. Occasionally, the formation bounced back some thunderbolts and struck these heavily armored soldiers, but they could not even hurt their hair. Every heavy blow from these armored soldiers would cause the grand formation to rumble loudly, and the foundation of the grand formation would gradually show signs of collapse. The pavilions on the mountaintop were crowded with frightened people. There were cultivators and mortals, but more than 80% of them were cultivators. About 3,000 people were sheltering in the last defensive formation, and sitting in the pavilion in the center, with a few heaven immortals and dozens of nascent divinity cultivators, was none other than Reverend Yao Yu, who had fled in a hurry after being severely injured. Reverend Yao Yu's face was ferocious, and his whole body was covered in pale golden blood. His body was trembling violently, and with every incantation gesture he struck, golden blood would spray out of the wounds on his body. The blood had accumulated to a thick layer on the ground, and no one knew how he could have so much blood flowing out of his body. Reverend Yao Yu, who was handsome and elegant, now looked like an evil ghost. He kept striking incantation gestures to stabilize the formation, while looking up at the oracles and armored soldiers who were besieging it, and snapped, "Is your prefecture overseer crazy? You've besieged me today, but when I'm free, I'll definitely kill every last one of you in High Province." Grinning hideously, the armored soldiers and oracles just kept attacking the formation, not bothering to talk to Reverend Yao Yu. If Reverend Yao Yu had not suddenly returned, the formation would have long been breached by these oracles and armored soldiers, and all 3,000 of his family members would have been captured alive by them according to Wuxi's order. However, Reverend Yao Yu's speed was too fast, so fast that it was beyond everyone's expectation. That was why he was able to rush into the formation and hold on until now. Wuxi smiled satisfactorily. The energy he had poured into Reverend Yao Yu's body just now was to speed up his return, so that he could teleport back as fast as possible. Otherwise, if these oracles and armored soldiers had breached Mount Moon Gazing and kept some of the spoils, Wuxi would have suffered a great loss. These oracles and armored soldiers were the private guards of Yu clan, and they only obeyed Yu Mu's command. So it was only natural for them to hide the richest part of the spoils. But Reverend Yao Yu had returned just in time, and the formation had held on until now. When Wuxi returned, it would be impossible for these oracles and armored soldiers to hide the spoils. At most, they could take away some insignificant profits from the immortal market, but the richest part, Mount Moon Gazing, would have to wait for Wuxi's return. Wuxi roared with laughter as he revealed himself in the void. Hovering above the oracles and soldiers, he pointed a finger at Reverend Yao Yu and cried out, "The former prefecture overseer of High Province has fled for his crimes of corruption and perverted the law. The current prefecture overseer is Yu Mu, the lineal descendant of Yu clan in Zhong Province. I'm the new military minister of High Province, Tan Lang." Demon Taoist Yao Yu. Why don't you surrender now? What are you waiting for? As his voice echoed out, Wuxia clenched his right fist and threw it down. A loud boom rang out as the southwest foundation of the formation collapsed, and a tower made of golden bricks shattered. A few of Reverend Yao Yu's descendants, who were filling the core of the formation with immortal stones and energy stones, howled miserably as they were smashed by the nearly 10 feet long golden bricks. Their bones broken and tendons torn, and they died on the spot. The collapse of the foundation triggered a chain reaction almost immediately, and the whole formation collapsed, revealing the pavilions and 3,000 of Reverend Yao Yu's clan members. Reverend Yao Yu cried out in alarm. A dazzling light burst out of his body as he soared into the sky, and the spirit pearl, about 10 feet in diameter, sprayed out a great sheet of cold air as it smashed down toward Wuxia. The pearl was a precious treasure that Reverend Yao Yu had cultivated with his life. As soon as the cold air came out, the oracles and armored soldiers in the sky could not withstand it any longer, and they began to flee in all directions. Wuxia shook his head and said mockingly, "You are at the end of your rope. Do you really think you can pierce through the silk?" Suddenly, dozens of illusions that looked exactly like him appeared around Wuxia. A small village appeared in the void, surrounded by countless pedestrians and shops, and soon, Reverend Yao Yu was enveloped in it. Hiding in the illusion, Wuxia approached Reverend Yao Yu without making a sound, then threw a heavy punch at the latter's forehead. Reverend Yao Yu, who was exhausted and had almost exhausted his immortal energy, fell to the ground and fell down from the sky. Putting away the spirit pearl, Wuxia pointed at the crying men and women, old and young, and said with a cold grin, "Capture them all alive. Don't let any of them escape." The oracles and armored soldiers, who had been fighting for a whole night, rushed forward like wolves and tigers. Chapter 596. 3 oracles from the Directorate of Celestials, shrouded in dark smoke, flew over. They pulled out 360 black needles, each measuring 3 feet and 6 inches long and as fine as a cow's hair, and stabbed them into 360 vital acupoints on Reverend Yao Yu's body. The needle was a vicious magical artifact crafted by the Directorate of Celestials. It was called the Immortal Detaining Needle. If a top-grade gold immortal was pierced by the needle and formed into the Immortal Detaining Spirit-Severing Formation in his body, he would have no choice but to become a prisoner of the Directorate of Celestials. The needles went into the unconscious Reverend Yao Yu's body, stretching out along his meridians and blood vessels. When the needles and all the acupoints touched each other, they immediately fused together like mercury. The 3 oracles moved as fast as lightning, and in just a few breaths of time, all the needles had gone into Reverend Yao Yu's body. Using his chaotic divine eyes, Wuxia saw that a large black net had appeared in Reverend Yao Yu's body. As his acupoints were broken, the immortal energy in his body kept leaking out of his body through the net. Before long, there was not even a drop of immortal energy left in his body. The net had also cut off his connection with the natural energy, so even if he woke up, he could not extract any natural energy from the world, and he could not restore his magic power. The needle was hollow, and it was filled with a black powder secretly concocted by the Directorate of Celestials. As the black powder spread through his body, it paralyzed his muscles, tendons, and bones, turning his well-tempered heaven immortal body limp and weak. At this moment, he only had the strength of a burly mortal man, and there was no chance for him to fight back before the oracles and armored soldiers of the Directorate of Celestials. As the medicinal powder spread through his body, the soreness in his muscles and bones caused by the medicinal powder woke him up. With great difficulty, he opened his eyes and looked at the half-inch-long needles sticking out of all the acupoints on his body, as well as the pale golden immortal energy that kept spreading through them. He could not help but laugh bitterly and say, "Immortal detaining needles? Hee, I've long heard of the famous immortal detaining needles, but I never thought I would have the chance to experience it myself." Taking a deep breath, Reverend Yao Yu stared at Wuxia and snapped, "Tanlang, do you know that I'm from Myriad Immortal Alliance?" Wuxia stamped his foot on Reverend Yao Yu's mouth, crushing half of his teeth and filling his mouth with blood and broken teeth, forcing him to swallow the blood and teeth into his stomach. The sharp teeth scratched his throat, nearly killing him with pain and suffocation. As a high-tier heaven immortal, When had he ever suffered like this? He was in so much pain and anger that he almost died from anger. Union of 10,000 immortals? Wuxia put on a fake smile and said intentionally, I've never heard of it. Are the people of the Union of 10,000 immortals that great? After kicking Reverend Yao Yu a few times, Wuxia pointed at the exposed pavilion and cried out, Somebody capture everyone alive and tie them up. Hey Huangliang? Huangliang. Bastard. What are you doing? Hurry up and count the treasures in the storehouse of Mount Moon Gazing. And record all the treasures. I still need to share the harvest with His Excellency Prefecture Overseer. Huang Liang had come out of nowhere. With a big smile on his face, he hurriedly pulled up his pants and tightened his belt. Wuxia glanced over his shoulder. The door of the pavilion from which Huang Liang had just come out was wide open. And through it, Wuxia saw a young girl lying on the ground. The girl's clothes were completely torn, and the roots of her two snow-white thighs were a mess of blood. Nodding and bowing, Huang Liang bowed and said, Your Excellency, I'm here. I'll go and check all the treasures in the storehouse right away. Wuxia nodded slowly. Pointing at the pavilion, he said in a low voice, That girl is your personal property. Bring her back to Ningbo City and enjoy yourself. After a brief pause, Wuxia scolded, If you dare to do something like this again, I'll cut off your penis. Huang Liang covered his crotch with both hands and said with a dry smile, I know my mistake. I won't make the same mistake again. While babbling, Huang Liang kept nodding and bowing as he backed away, fully playing the role of a lackey. With great difficulty, Reverend Yao Yu turned his head and gave the pavilion a glance, then suddenly roared, That's my youngest great-granddaughter. Wuxia stamped his foot on Reverend Yao Yu's head, forcing all the curses back into his stomach. Have you not done such a thing before? Snapped Wuxia. Today, your full moon mountain has suffered such a great calamity. Did you ever think of today's retribution when you forced others in the past? Reverend Yao Yu's eyes went wide as he stared at Wuxia and squeezed a few words out of his mouth. Son of a bitch, I'm going to kill you. Wuxia frowned and shook his head, then summoned a few oracles from the Directorate of Celestials, and gave them some instructions in a low voice. The oracles nodded knowingly, then took out specially made talismans that were tens of feet long and each as wide as a palm, wrapping them around Reverend Yao Yu dozens of times. With these talismans coiled around his body, he did not even have the strength to shatter the top of his head and escape with his immortal soul. Fearing that Reverend Yao Yu still had some mystic arts, the oracles pierced all the important joints of his body with specially made chains, tying him up like a rice dumpling. Among Reverend Yao Yu's children and grandchildren, there were only 5 lower-tier heaven immortals, and the strongest among them was only in the realm of nascent divinity. Faced with the ferocious oracles and heavy-armored soldiers, Reverend Yao Yu's children and grandchildren had lost the courage to resist. Including the 5 heaven immortals, they were all captured and suppressed by the oracles with magical artifacts. Wuxia shook his head as he watched. Reverend Yao Yu was extremely fierce to outsiders, and he could tell from the way he hunted down Princess Zhonglu and her companions that he was not a soft-hearted man. But he was indeed a good patriarch to his children and clansmen. He had almost single-handedly taken care of everything in Mount Moon Gazing, and all his clansmen were living a carefree life under his wing. This was the greatest tragedy of Mount Moon Gazing. They had been living free and unfettered for too long that they did not even know how to fight. When they lost Reverend Yao Yu, their backbone, they were easily captured by the men brought by Wuxia. There were 3,497 people in total, and soon, the total number of captives was reported. These people were Reverend Yao Yu's wives and children, his direct clan members. Mount Moon Gazing used to have a large number of common people at their beck and call, and there were tens of thousands of servants and maids. But, when the attack on the mountain began, Reverend Yao Yu's clansmen had abandoned the defensive formation and retreated to the top of the mountain in defeat. As a result, the maids and maids were killed by the aftermath of the attack, and only less than 2,000 of them survived. These thousands of servants and maids were all enslaved by Wuqi's order, and were going to be brought back to Ningbo City to be sold. As a matter of fact, even without Wuqi's order, Great Yu Dynasty had never been kind to these common people who had served the enemy. Any common person who had worked for itinerant cultivators would often end up with their entire clan executed. It was already a very merciful way for Wuqi to just sell these people as slaves. In high spirits, Huang Liang ordered hundreds of armored soldiers and strong men selected from the thousands of servants to clean out all the palaces, pavilions, storehouses, and secret chambers on Mount Moon Gazing. With over 3,000 of Reverend Yao Yu's clansmen here, Huang Liang only needed to intimidate them a little, and they immediately told him all the storehouses and secret chambers on the mountain. Bags of spirit stones, bags of immortal stones, a large number of spirit herbs, ores, all kinds of beautiful jades, spirit crystals, all kinds of natural treasures. A huge number of treasures were carried out from all over the moon-gazing mountain, gradually piling up into a small hill in front of the pavilion on the top of the mountain. Reverend Yao Yu was a high-tier heaven immortal who had attained the Tao for hundreds of periods. He had established his foundation on Mount Moon Gazing for a few periods, and had been operating the Yao Yu immortal market for hundreds of thousands of years. Therefore, he was extremely wealthy, and that was why he was able to rent a gold immortal item from a gold immortal to inflict a heavy blow on the green dome shark. With his wealth accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years, even if he only mined one immortal stone a day from the energy veins, it would still be an extremely huge figure. Moreover, the resources he had obtained from various energy veins in High Province, and the wealth he had earned through trade was far more than that. Huang Liang counted all of Reverend Yao Yu's assets, and in the end, Huang Liang could not help but break out in a cold sweat. Reverend Yao Yu's total assets were astonishing. His total assets were roughly equivalent to the total income of a first-grade province like Zhong Province for 2 years. On the other hand, a first-grade province like Zhong Province had a total population of trillions. It was not something that a 9th-grade province like Hai Province, which had a population of less than 10 million, could compare with. With Huang Liang's resourcefulness, it took him 1 day and 1 night to count all of Reverend Yao Yu's assets. Carefully, he came before Wuqi and whispered the huge figure to Wuqi. Wuqi was slightly taken aback. He did not expect Reverend Yao Yu to be so wealthy. The wealth and resources he had accumulated were more than enough to support the development of a sect with 1,000 members. After a brief moment of pondering, Wuqi glanced at the oracles and armored soldiers standing around him, then waved his hand and said, "Brothers, thank you for your hard work in attacking Mount Moon Gazing. I'll give each of you 1 immortal stone, 100 upper-grade energy stones, and 10,000 gold pearls as compensation." The oracles and armored soldiers were overjoyed, and Chi bowed to Wuqi. 10,000 gold pearls were enough for these oracles and armored soldiers to live a luxurious life for 10 years, and 100 upper-grade energy stones were even more valuable. As for an immortal stone, even the oracles and armored soldiers of the human race could use the immortal energy contained in it. After all, it was the purest natural energy, and it was very beneficial to living beings with sufficient overall strength. On top of that, as long as the structure of the immortal stone was not damaged, even if the immortal energy contained in it was depleted, it could automatically absorb the natural energy and slowly recover itself. There would never be a day when it would run dry. An immortal stone was enough to be passed down as a family heirloom. Wuqi's reward was extremely generous. As a result, the oracles and armored soldiers who besieged Mount Moon Gazing were filled with joy, and they began to respect and get close to Wuqi. At Wuqi's order, 2 flying ships were fully loaded, and all the captives were taken aboard. Then the overloaded ships slowly flew back to Ningbo City at a speed that was a few times slower than when they came. Along the way, Wuqi found an opportunity to loot all the valuables of Yao Yu Pavilion from Manager Yu, who was waiting obediently in the wilderness. In short, Wuqi had gained a great harvest from this trip. Not only did he have the valuables to develop his own territory in the future, he even had enough resources for the disciples of Underhand sect to cultivate for dozens of years. Standing at the prow of the flying ship with a refreshed mind, Wuqi was glancing around at the beautiful scenery when he suddenly received a message from the celestial fiend puppet. Princess Zhonglu had brought a large number of men and sneaked into Hai Province. Chapter 597. Half a month had passed since Wuxia led the army to wipe out Mount Moon Gazing. After eradicating the largest immortal power in High Province, Duyu's influence in High Province skyrocketed. Those immortals and itinerant cultivators quickly retracted their tentacles, and no one dared to act rashly or act as unscrupulously as before they found out the strength of the current prefecture overseer. For a time, High Province became peaceful, and everything was carried out in an orderly manner according to Yu Miao's will. High Province bordered the ocean, and its southeast was an extremely fertile land. It was a place with lush vegetation and abundant wild animals, with all kinds of fruits ripening twice, thrice, or even 4 times a year. There were countless mineral veins, and the weather was good all year round, and there was no suffering from wind or snow. It could really be described as a land of abundance. Near the mountains in the south, there was a piece of land about 1,000,000 miles in circumference that stretched diagonally into the ocean. The coastline of this peninsula was extremely complicated, with many deep waters and good harbors, and countless schools of fish in the surrounding waters. It was a natural top-grade fishing ground. At this moment, from the 5 counties under High Province's jurisdiction, 200,000 people were marching southeast with their families. They were hauling their pots, bowls, ladles, and other belongings in carts, calling their children along the way. There were a total of 1,000,000 people, and they were the people Yu Miao had transferred from the 5 counties to Wuqi's private territory in return for a favor. Each of these people carried a bone talisman drawn by the oracles of the Directorate of Celestials. Natural energy kept pouring into the talismans, which then turned into magical power and flowed into these people's bodies. With the help of the talismans, these people could travel tens of thousands of miles a day as long as they hastened their journey. Days passed, and 3 months later, the 1,000,000 people finally arrived at the land in the southeast that Yu Miao had given to Wuqi. Along the way, the elites of scouting office sent by Wuqi gave them directions, and at the same time, they protected the people by driving away the ferocious beasts and poisonous insects they encountered along the way, as well as the ferocious and violent mountain spirits and water ghosts. Originally, Wuqi could have used Yu Miao's serpentine flying ship to transport several thousand people at a time, and with a few energy stones, it would only take him half a month at most to transport the 1,000,000 people to his territory. However, Wuqi had the intention to make these millions of people work hard. At the same time, he had also sent out the elites of the scouting office to guard and monitor them, and to select the talents that could be used in the future. During the 3 months of arduous journey, tens of thousands of outstanding people had caught the attention of the elites of the scouting office. These people had strong organizational skills. Along the way, although there were old and young people, men and women in the 5 migration teams, whether it was traveling, setting up camp, cooking, or other matters, everything was carried out in an orderly manner under their coordination and arrangement. Wuqi would appoint these people as the first batch of officials in his territory to help him manage his people. There were also some who possessed extremely powerful individual strengths. They helped the elites of the scouting office, and took on the heavy responsibility of protecting the civilians along the way. Among these mortals who had never practiced cultivation, there were heroes who could kill pythons with bare hands, and heroes who could slay dozens of tigers with a single sword strike. Without a doubt, these people would become the warriors and generals of the East Sea military court established by Wuqi. They would be the private guards under Wuqi's command, and they had nothing to do with the 10,000 soldiers the military court had just recruited. There were also some people who had learned some wonderful abilities on their own. For example, some could communicate with birds and beasts, some could communicate with ghosts and mountain gods, some could control all kinds of poisonous insects, and some could recognize the medicinal properties of various herbs with just a glance. These people who were born with extraordinary abilities would be the best candidates for the position of oracles in the Directorate of Celestials in East Sea County. With Princess Zhonglu, the mentor who had inherited the great Tao of Ancient God, the future development of the Directorate of Celestials in East Sea County would definitely satisfy Wuqi. The 3-month-long journey had exhausted everyone, but it had also allowed the elites among the millions of civilians to unleash their dazzling brilliance. 3 months later, when these civilians had entered the territory of the East Sea County, Wuqi and Princess Zhonglu exercised their magic, and transported them overnight to a peninsula that stretched thousands of miles into the sea in the southernmost direction. Along the northern coastline, Wuxia had built an East Sea city, 20 towns, and dozens of villages within a circumference of 500 miles, with families as the basic unit and clans as the main structure. 1 million civilians had gathered on this fertile land with their livestock and carriages of various sizes. To the north was a vast expanse of blue ocean, and the sea breeze was blowing gently, bringing with it a pungent smell of the sea. A large flock of seagulls could be seen wheeling in the sky, their silvery white bodies glinting dazzlingly under the sunlight, making them look like fairies from a dream, endlessly beautiful. The grass on the fertile land was as tall as a man's neck, and dense jungles could be seen everywhere. Not far away from these millions of civilians, a large group of wild beasts was gathered. The herbivorous beasts were leisurely looking in their direction, while the carnivorous beasts were greedily staring at these strange two-legged creatures that they had never seen before. The sea breeze with the smell of the sea blew, and the dense flowers in the grass sprayed out a large amount of pollen that flew with the wind. The sunlight shone on the dense pollen, like a group of fireflies flying out from the grass. The pungent smell of the sea disappeared, and became a rich fragrance that wafted in all directions. The fragrance of the flowers was mixed with the refreshing scent of the grass, setting off the pollen that looked like fireflies. The constant cries of seagulls could be heard coming from the sky, making the millions of civilians standing on the grass feel as if they were really in a beautiful dream. They still had no idea why they were here. Their ancestors had come to High Province hundreds of years ago, and worked hard to establish the foundation of 5 counties in High Province. However, when the new prefecture overseer gave the order, the 1 million people left their homeland, left their familiar houses, and came to this fertile land that no one had ever set foot on before, which had retained its original appearance. Everything had to start from the heart, and they had to open up a new home on this barren land. 1 million people raised their heads and stared blankly at Wuxia and Princess Zhonglu, who were hovering in midair. Led by Su Qin and Yan Bugui, the 500 elites of Scouting Office were patrolling in the distance, driving away the malicious carnivorous beasts. From time to time, they would look up at the densely packed civilians, their hearts filled with joy. Unlike in Lu County, these 1 million civilians belonged to them, and the land under their feet belonged to them as well. East Sea County would be their real root and home on Penghu continent. These 1 million civilians would become their people, their brothers, and their fellow countrymen. Now that they were on Penghu continent, right in the middle of the desolate grassland, Yan Bugui and the 500 elites of Scouting Office, and even the old man Su Qin, had a strange feeling of homecoming. Holding Princess Zhongli's hand in his, Wuxia just smiled and looked at the 1 million people without saying a word. Clad in a gorgeous and mysterious black palace dress, Princess Zhongli glanced at the civilians with a pair of eyes that were as deep as the dark night on her beautiful face. Everyone bowed their heads. They all thought that Princess Zhongli, who was noble, mysterious, and inviolable, was looking at them. It was as if her eyes were filled with a terrible power like a storm and thunder, and also had the gentleness and kindness of a mother. It was a strange feeling that made everyone feel uneasy. They felt that they were not looking at a beautiful woman, but a god. This place is called East Sea County. From today onwards, all of you are the people of East Sea County. Princess Zhongli's crisp voice rang out like the cry of a phoenix. Slowly, she raised her right hand and said, "My name is Zhonglu, and I will be your lord, sheltering you forever. In the name of Zhonglu, rise." A beam of 5-colored divine light shot out from Princess Zhongli's fingertip. Suddenly, the ground began to shake, and deep rumbling noises were heard coming from underground. The 1 million people cried out in shock at the same time as they looked at a few miles ahead of them, where a city measuring 100 miles in both width and length suddenly rose from the ground. The city measured 100 miles in both width and length, with a wall that was 150 feet tall and 100 feet wide at the top. Such a magnificent city was shakily rising from the ground, and a fresh smell of soil came wafting into the air. This city was made entirely of soil. Princess Zhonglu smiled majestically and said, "In the name of Zhonglu, melt." Out of nowhere, 2 divine flames of purple and green burst out from the city, The city wall measured 100 miles in both width and length, 150 feet tall, and 150 feet wide, was instantly melted by the heat, while the soil melted into translucent magma that looked like crystal. The divine flames drilled down the city wall and went several miles deep into the ground. All the soil along the way was melted and turned into crimson magma. Heat towered into the sky. When the 1 million people witnessed this incredible scene, some of them began to kneel down and worship Princess Zhonglu piously. Princess Zhonglu smiled delightedly and cried out in a deep voice, "In the name of Zhonglu, merge!" A thunderclap rang out, and the city cooled down abruptly. Then, a magnificent city with a seamless body and a foundation that went several miles deep into the ground took shape with a boom. The golden-red city wall stood on the grassland, glinting dazzlingly under the sunlight. This city wall was completely forged by Princess Zhonglu with her magic power, and its strength was 100 times stronger than steel. It was more than enough to provide the strongest defense for these people. The land in the city was flat, and the streets and neighborhoods were well planned. Some important buildings, such as the City Lord Mansion, the Directorate of Celestials, the Military Court, and many others, had also taken shape. Just like the city wall, all the buildings were made of soil that had been melted. This was the East Sea City, the seat of the East Sea County planned by Wuxia. Surrounding the East Sea City were 20 smaller cities, each measuring only 10 miles in both width and length. They were built by Princess Zhonglu with her divine power in front of all the people. They were followed by dozens of villages, each of which was also protected by a city wall. With the East Sea City as the center, 20 towns and dozens of villages covered the fertile land within 500 miles in circumference. Then, a great fire broke out and burned the grassland within 500 miles in circumference, sending plumes of smoke billowing into the sky. Amidst the cheers of the 1 million people, the fertile land was turned into fertile land. Wuxia had taken his first step in East Sea County. Princess Zhonglu was appointed as the first county governor of East Sea County. Under her leadership, the 1 million people began to build houses, divide fields, build fishing boats and other tools, and began their lives in East Sea County. With the miracle of Princess Zhonglu, the 1 million people devoted themselves to the construction of their homes with an almost fanatical spirit. As for Wuxia, after killing a few flood dragons who were stirring up trouble in the ocean, he rushed back to High Province at the fastest speed he could muster. Myriad Immortal Alliance had sent an emissary from the Ascending Immortal Hall, ordering the officials of High Province to hand over all the people from Reverend Yao Yu's clan. Chapter 598. The flying ship sped across the sky. Apart from the necessary crew, there were only 200 elites of scouting office on board. Clad in heavy armors, these soldiers, who had also practiced the true body of heaven and earth scripture, patrolled back and forth on the deck of the ship, keeping a vigilant eye on the surroundings at all times. After wiping out Mount Moon gazing, Wuxia and Yumu had made a fortune. Not to mention that Yumu had used the money to expand the prefecture overseer mansion, and buy beautiful concubines and maids. Wuxia had also used the money to buy 3 large and 9 small flying ships for the military court of High Province, which had greatly increased the overall combat strength of the military court. The flying ship, shaped like a great serpent, measured 1 mile and 336 feet long, and could accommodate 2,000 armored soldiers, was one of the 3 flying ships, and was now being used by Wuxia as his mode of transportation. The 200 elites of scouting office were controlling the ship, while Wuxia was sitting in the cabin, carefully refining Reverend Yao Yu's pearl, which measured about 10 feet in diameter. A stream of divine flame of order sprayed out of Wuqia's palm, slowly burning the pearl, which was glinting with moonlight and emanating a gentle energy fluctuation. Reverend Yao Yu had taken the pearl from the body of a big mussel that had become a spirit in the deep sea, and it could be considered as a natural spirit item. The mussel had the ability to absorb the power of the stars and the moon, and the pearl could communicate with the power of the moon and the stars, transforming it into various divine abilities to attack the enemy. Therefore, Wuxia had the idea of refining the pearl into his new weapon. Although the pearl was magical and psychic, in Wuqia's opinion, it still had too many impurities. The reason why he used the divine flame of order to refine the pearl was that he only needed the purest energy essence in the pearl, and everything else could be discarded. Over the past 3 months he had been busy migrating millions of people to build the East Sea County, so he did not have much time to refine the pearl. Over the past 3 months, he had spent 2 hours every day to refine the orb. Now more than 90% of the impurities in the orb had been refined, and only a silver cyan orb core that was the size of a human head was left. It was releasing a dazzling radiance. The flying ship streaked across the sky, and Ningbo City was already visible in the distance. A scouting officer came to the door of Wuqi's quiet room, and gently knocked on the door. Wuqi opened his eyes, retracted the divine flame in his hand, and swallowed the bead. Slowly, he nourished the bead with his own profound qi, strengthening the connection between him and the bead. Accompanied by a faint whistling noise, the flying ship landed on the square in front of the Directorate of Celestials in Ningbo City. Deep pits and ditches had been dug up all around the Directorate of Celestials in Ningbo City. A large number of people were busy cutting boulders and building new palaces. Wuqi recruited 10,000 new soldiers in Ningbo City of Haizhou Province and purchased 12 airboats. As the original 3 palaces could no longer meet the demand of the military court, Wuqi allocated a huge sum of money to expand the 3 palaces into 36 palaces and build a military camp nearby that could accommodate 10,000 people. The expansion of the military court and the expansion of Yumu's prefecture overseer mansion were 2 major projects that started at the same time. At the very least, the current area of Ningbo City was no longer large enough. Yumu was also planning to build a new city wall around the original one, enclosing an area of 40 miles in both width and length as the new city. The old city would only be used by the officials of Hai Province, and the new outer city would be where the common people lived. The annihilation of Mount Moon Gazing had brought Wuqi and Yumu a huge amount of money and wealth, which immediately began to bring about tremendous changes to Ningbo City. With this as the foundation, not to mention Wuqi, even Yumu could not agree to the conditions put forward by Myriad Immortal Alliance, to release Reverend Yao Yu and his clan members and disciples unconditionally. If that was the case, should they return all his wealth to him as well? They had already spent a lot of money. Could it be that Wuqi and Yumu had to pay for Reverend Yao Yu out of their own pockets? 200 heavily armored soldiers of scouting office followed closely behind Wuqi as he stepped off the flying ship. Huang Liang, who had long received the news, came up to Wuqi with dozens of soldiers. He bowed to Wuqi and said, "Your Excellency, I've heard that the emissary of Myriad Immortal Alliance is very rude and unreasonable. He made a scene in the Prefecture Overseer mansion today, and even your Excellency Prefecture Overseer has suffered a little." Wuqi snorted coldly and patted Huang Liang on the shoulder. "You don't have to worry about these things. You're in charge of the expansion of the military court, and it will be a great merit if you do it well." The emissary of Myriad Immortal Alliance? Huang Liang felt as if his bones had become lighter. Smiling, he bent down and said, "Rest assured, Your Excellency. With me here to supervise, who dares not to work hard? Don't worry. I'm sure the work will be done beautifully." Nodding satisfactorily, Wuqi patted Huang Liang on the shoulder. After that, he glanced at the muddy construction site, then quickly led the 200 soldiers toward the Prefecture Overseer mansion. The emissary of Myriad Immortal Alliance made a scene in the Prefecture Overseer mansion. And Yumu actually suffered a little? Wuqi's interest was piqued. What was the purpose of Myriad Immortal Alliance? What gave them the confidence to confront Diyu's officials so forcefully? He walked briskly along the street toward the Prefecture Overseer mansion. He did not see any pedestrians along the way, and the doors of the shops along the street were tightly shut. Wuqi could sense a hint of tension and fear from those tightly shut doors. When he was close to the mansion, the street had been sealed off by the private guards brought by Yumu. 3,000 private guards and 1,000 oracles from the Directorate of Celestials had completely surrounded the mansion. The 3 large flying ships newly purchased by the Prefecture Overseer mansion, together with the snake-shaped flying ship brought by Yumu, were hovering above the mansion. The decks under the ships were wide open, revealing the powerful weapons inside. The interior of the 4 ships flickered with bright lights, and hundreds of translucent, multi-edged crystal cones were aimed at a certain spot in the mansion, emanating a powerful energy fluctuation that made one's heart palpitate. When the guards of the mansion saw Wuxia and his men, many soldiers and generals bowed and saluted. Wuxia walked over without saying a word. Before entering the mansion, he left 200 elite scouting office soldiers outside the gate. These soldiers had only been cultivating the true body of heaven and earth scripture for a short time, and the strongest among them only had an overall strength close to that of a heaven immortal. Therefore, he left them outside the gate for the sake of their safety. If they were to fight the emissary of Myriad Immortal Alliance, Wuxia did not want his men to be wiped out. The atmosphere in the mansion was tense, and there were no maids or servants around. It was only when Wuxia walked all the way to the entrance of the main hall that he saw Yumi and a few members of Yu clan blocking the entrance with 30 heavy-armored generals and a few moon oracles. When they saw Wuxia approaching, Yumi and the members of Yu clan breathed a long sigh of relief, as if they had found their backbone. Pointing at the main hall, Yumi whispered to Wuxia, "Be careful, General Tanlang. These people from the Ascending Immortal Hall of Myriad Immortal Alliance are very arrogant." Wuxia nodded. In front of Yumi, he took out a bone talisman and crushed it. A faintly discernible ripple of restrictive energy immediately enveloped him as he strode into the hall. Yumi nodded approvingly. The bone talisman Wuxia had crushed was a powerful talisman specially designed to defend against soul attacks. In Yumi's opinion, Wuxia was so cautious that he had to protect himself before entering the door. Wuxia acted so cautiously, which was what a qualified commander should be like. The atmosphere in the hall was tense, and the air was almost frozen. With his hands clasped behind his back, Yu Miao stood under the pillar of fire at the far end of the hall, surrounded by many officials of Ningbo City, all looking unkindly at the 3 black-clothed Taoists standing in the middle of the hall. Yu Miao's face lit up when he saw Wuxia, and a relaxed smile appeared on his face. Before Wuxia could say anything, one of the black-clothed Taoists snapped, "If you don't hand over fellow Taoist Yao Yu and his clan members in half an hour, don't blame us for being ruthless. You are just a 9th-grade province, and with your measly strength, Myriad Immortal Alliance can wipe you out easily." Yu Miao rolled his eyes and said with a cold and arrogant grin, "You have said that 3 times. If High Province insists on executing fellow Taoist Yao Yu according to the law of Diyu, what will Myriad Immortal Alliance do? Wipe out High Province? Aren't you afraid of getting yourself into trouble?" The black-clothed Taoist's tone became even colder. "Getting myself into trouble? Heh, with just your High Province?" Just as Yu Miao was about to say something, Wuxia had already strode up behind the 3 Taoists. The divine sense of immortal cultivators was very sensitive, and as soon as Wuxia entered the hall, the 3 Taoists had already discovered him. However, they deliberately ignored him, waiting for an opportunity to show off their strength. As soon as Wuxia came up behind one of the Taoists, the latter snapped, "How dare you, you arrogant fellow! Get out of here!" With a backhand slap and a flick of his sleeve, a green thunderbolt shot out with a deafening rumble and smashed heavily on Wuqia's chest. It was just an ordinary 5 elements palm thunder spell, and it was inclined to the element of green wood. When it exploded, not only could it hurt one's body, it could also paralyze all the meridians in one's body, making it impossible for one to move. The thunderbolts exploded, but Wuxia did not move at all. He grabbed the Taoist's neck with one hand, lifted up the Taoist's body that weighed no more than 70 to 80 kilograms, and smashed him hard onto the ground. A crisp sound rang out, as if a dozen eggs had been smashed at the same time, and the black-clad Taoist's immortal body was smashed to pieces. A beam of golden light flew up, and the Taoist's immortal soul rushed out of the shattered body, staring at Wuxia in horror. "Why you?" The Taoist whose immortal body was destroyed, and the other 2 black-clothed Taoists were all stunned. They stared in horror at the bloody mess on the ground, trembling as they took a few steps back. The 3 black-clothed Taoists had the cultivation base of 12th-tier heaven immortals, and none of the officials of High Province present, including Yu Miao, was a match for them. However, in Wuqia's hands, a 12th-tier heaven immortal was no different from a baby. Looking at the 3 immortals, Wuxia said coolly, "The demon Taoist Yao Yu is in my hands, and so are all his clan members. The 9th day of the first lunar month in 3 months will be a day of great inauspiciousness. The whole world will be filled with murderous aura, and I'm going to offer him and his clan members to the heaven and earth ghosts and deities as sacrifices. Please come and witness the ceremony." The black-clothed Taoist looked down at the broken immortal body, then stared at Wuxia through clenched teeth and said, "You've brought a great disaster to High Province." "Just give it a try," said Wuxia in a deep voice. "If Myriad Immortal Alliance really has the guts, then slaughter the entire High Province. Let's see if I, the human emperor Du, will turn a blind eye to the grave crime of slaughtering an entire province. And let's see if I, the human emperor, will allow you to do whatever you want." The 3 black-clothed Taoists saw Chi-Chi's expression flicker, while the immortal with the broken immortal body was the first to transform into a beam of light and fly into the sky. The other 2 black-clothed Taoists sped away as well. "Just you wait. Myriad Immortal Alliance will not let this matter rest." They snapped through their clenched teeth. Wuxia and Yu Miao exchanged a glance, then laughed and said in unison, "We'll be waiting." Chapter 599. The servants were cleaning up the mess of flesh and blood on the floor. Wuxia had smashed the Heaven Immortal's fleshly body into pieces, and his bones were crushed into powder, lying flat on the floor. The servants had to use sharp iron shovels to clean up the blood and flesh that stuck to the floor. Wuxia and Yu Miao sat opposite each other in the great hall, with a small table placed between them. A beautiful girl in a red dress with an oval face carefully served the 2 of them and brewed tea for them. She was the personal maid Yu Miao had bought at a high price over the past 3 months after scouring the people of High Province. Holding the teacup, Wuxia learned from Yu Miao about the background of the 3 black-clothed Taoists. It happened early in the morning. Just as Yu Miao was dealing with the affairs of High Province in the Great Hall, the 3 black-clothed Taoists descended from the sky in an insolent manner, striking down a large number of the prefecture overseer mansion's private guards with a series of thunder techniques. Later, 1,000 oracles from the Directorate of Celestials heard the news and came to help. Led by dozens of moon oracles, they laid out a formation and barely managed to fend off the attack of the 3 black-clothed Taoists. Even so, Yu Miao's shoulder was slashed by a sword beam from one of the black-clothed Taoists, and his arm was nearly chopped off. Fortunately, Yu Miao had obtained a few defensive treasures from Yu Miao before he left. As soon as he realized something was wrong, he immediately put on the bone armor, saving his life from the attacks of the 3 black-clothed Taoists. After that, the chief officials, adjutants, and officials of all the palaces in High Province attacked together. Together with the few powerful bone talismans in Yu Miao's hand, they were barely able to fight against the 3 black-clothed Taoists. After that, the 3 black-clothed Taoists explained their purpose. They were the emissaries of the ascending immortal hall of Myriad Immortal Alliance, and were ordered to inform the officials of High Province that if they did not want the people of High Province to be plunged into misery and suffering, they had to hand over Reverend Yao Yu and his family members, and pay a large sum of compensation. Otherwise, Myriad Immortal Alliance would definitely send experts to attack High Province to avenge Reverend Yao Yu and his family members. Yu Mu was very alert. Seeing that the 3 black-clothed Taoists had a profound cultivation base, and that the officials of High Province could not fight them, he quickly sent a message to Wuxia, and only drove the 3 black-clothed Taoists away when Wuxia arrived. After listening to the cause and effect of the matter, Wuxia frowned. Picking up a cup of fragrant tea and draining it, Wuxia looked at Yu Miao with a puzzled expression. Myriad Immortal Alliance was just a loose alliance of immortals, and Reverend Yao Yu was just an ordinary ally of it. So, why would the alliance come to High Province to avenge him? Every year, many of the allies of the Union of 10,000 Immortals were killed because of the attack by the Du government, but they didn't see the Union of 10,000 Immortals coming forward with such great fanfare to demand an explanation. Yu Mu also looked at Wuxia puzzled. As a direct descendant of the Yu clan in Zhong Province, he knew far more about Myriad Immortal Alliance than Wuxia. The relationship between Myriad Immortal Alliance and the Du government was very bad, even extremely bad. The human emperor had personally issued an order to arrest the higher-ups of Myriad Immortal Alliance, and both sides were almost at odds with each other. But Pangu continent was, after all, Diyu's territory, and even primordial immortals dared not to act recklessly here. Myriad Immortal Alliance had a tremendous latent power, and most of the immortals and itinerant cultivators on Pangu continent were inextricably linked to it. But no one had ever heard that Myriad Immortal Alliance dared to attack the Diyu government. Yu Mu told Wuqi in a low voice what he knew about Myriad Immortal Alliance, as well as the doubts in his mind. According to his judgment, unless the higher-ups of Myriad Immortal Alliance were out of their minds, they should not have done such a thing. If Myriad Immortal Alliance really attacked High Province for the sake of Reverend Yaoyu, and if they really massacred the people of High Province, Diyu would definitely use all means to retaliate against them. The relationship between human beings and immortals on Pangu continent was very delicate, and it was not easy for the Celestial Court and Diyu to maintain a balance on Pangu continent. Myriad Immortal Alliance's reckless behavior was likely to completely break the balance. Once a conflict broke out between Diyu and the Celestial Court, and a war broke out between human beings and immortals, neither side had the confidence to win. Once the number of casualties of the human race on Pangu continent exceeded a certain limit, the terrible consequences would be something that even the human emperor of Diyu and the celestial emperor of the Celestial Court would not be able to bear. As Wu Qi sat cross-legged beside the table, Yu Mu began to speak with fervor and assurance. In the past, the ancient saints created human beings in accordance with the heavenly Tao, using the bloodline of Pangu the great saint and many divine beasts to create the fleshly body of the human race. Saint Nuwa used the myriad spirit cauldron to transform her soul into the soul of the human race and awaken their intelligence. All the ancient saints swore together that the human race was the spirit of all living beings, the master of the heaven and earth, the race entrusted by the heavenly Tao. If Myriad Immortal Alliance starts a war and lets Diyu and the Celestial Court attack and kill each other, if the human race suffers too many losses, aren't they afraid that the ancient saints, who have long disappeared, will show up? Wu Qi's heart twitched a few times. The ancient saints created human beings together, and Saint Nuwa injected the soul into the human race and awakened their intelligence. The legend was similar to the myths and legends that Lu Xiaobai had read in some ancient books on Earth. But who were the saints who created the human race, and what they were doing now? Yuzong had no idea. But Wu Qi quickly put these distracting thoughts to the back of his mind. How could he have the time to speculate about these illusory things? Lightly tapping the table with his fingers, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "These ancient saints and the like are too far away from us. The first thing we need to do now is to find out why Myriad Immortal Alliance is standing up for Reverend Yaoyu. Later, I'll interrogate Reverend Yaoyu and find out if he has any powerful backers in the alliance. As for your Excellency Prefecture Overseer, get ready for a conflict with Myriad Immortal Alliance." Yu Mu's face suddenly became very serious. After pondering for a long time, he frowned and said, "Do you think a war will break out?" Wu Qi looked up at the sky and pondered for a full quarter of an hour with a frown on his face. Then he performed an incantation gesture with both hands and gradually merged the fluctuation of his soul with the surrounding void, imitating Princess Zhongli's movements. At the same time, he silently recited an incantation under his breath, trying to find out the truth in the boundless fog with the art of divination. But after a long time of effort, it was clear that Wu Qi did not have any outstanding talent in the divine ability to speculate the heaven's secret. So he gave up and said with a wry smile, "Myriad Immortal Alliance is acting so arrogantly, and I've killed one of their 3 emissaries. It would be strange if they don't retaliate." After pondering for a long time, Wu Qi nodded and said, "They will definitely retaliate, but we can't be sure of the intensity of their retaliation. Will they really attack High Province for Reverend Yaoyu? Or will they limit the storm to a very small area? We can only bear it passively, and we can't take the initiative to respond." With a long sigh, Wu Qi looked at Yu Mu, whose face was unsightly, and said, "Send a letter to Zhong Province and report everything here directly to Prefecture Overseer Bo Zhongfu, and ask Zhong Province to secretly send reinforcements. In the face of a formidable enemy like Myriad Immortal Alliance, it is not a shameful thing to ask for reinforcements. It is better to ask the Grand Oracle to send reinforcements to High Province." Yu He nodded and said through clenched teeth, We'll see what they want to do when the time comes. Reverend Yao Yu. He Tan Lang, if you want to sacrifice him, you must sacrifice his entire clan. You can't hand them over to Myriad Immortal Alliance. We can't afford to lose our face. Wuxia was very satisfied with Yu He's attitude. Myriad Immortal Alliance was aggressive, and High Province could only use the toughest means to give them a head-on blow. Otherwise, if the Union of 10,000 Immortals got some benefits in High Province, they might send more people to High Province. Could it be that the Union of 10,000 Immortals would be like the former governor of High Province, letting the Immortals and rogue cultivators of the Union of 10,000 Immortals do whatever they wanted in High Province? High Province was Wuqi's private territory, and he would not tolerate anyone encroaching on his interests in High Province. After the secret negotiation between Wuqi and Yu He, several official documents were sent to Zhongning City in Zhong Province at the fastest speed. Wuqi and Yu He mobilized their subordinates, including the officials of High Province, and personally joined the expansion project of High Province's city wall. The hierarchy of Diyu was very strict, and nobles like Wuqi and Yu He could not participate in all kinds of manual labor. Even though these nobles had the power to move mountains, and many things could be done with just a wave of their hands, there were many things they would not do because of their status. Just like the construction of the city wall of High Province, it took tens of thousands of people several years to build the city wall, but any official of High Province could build the city wall in just one day with his or her magical powers. But there was a difference between the nobility and the lowly. How could you expect the officials to do this kind of work? Now that Myriad Immortal Alliance was under pressure, Yu He and the others personally built the new city wall, which was 300 feet tall and 50 miles wide. The oracles of the Directorate of Celestials brought out a large number of rare materials from the storehouse, and carved all kinds of formations and talismans on the wall, which was made entirely of black rocks, and constructed powerful defensive mechanisms on the wall, as well as all kinds of vicious traps and ambushes. Yu He had just made a fortune, and for the safety of High Province, he was very willing to spend a lot of money. Through the channels of Yu Clan, he bought a large number of powerful bone talismans, countless bows and arrows, countless armors, staffs, and countless powerful weapons. The 3,000 private guards around him were armed to the teeth, and the 10,000 soldiers Wuqi had recruited had been expanded to 30,000 soldiers. All of them had received their own armors, bows, and other weapons. Even though the human soldiers did not have any cultivation base, as long as they could draw a bow and shoot an arrow, they could pose a great threat to cultivators. The various powerful rune arrows forged by the Directorate of Celestials and the military court could cause deadly damage to heaven immortals. Under Wuqi's leadership, the expanded army of 30,000 soldiers was firing arrows at the target day and night. With the powerful weapons made by the human race and their large number, even if the Myriad Immortal Alliance's gold immortals came to attack, they would not be able to escape unscathed. After 7 days of intensive training, the secret reinforcements from Zhongning City finally arrived. When the new patriarch of Zhong Province, Bo Zhongfu, heard that Myriad Immortal Alliance had provoked the authority of High Province, he simply sent his third son, Bo Yunting, to lead an army of 100,000 soldiers. Among the 100,000 soldiers, there were 12 generals from the 1 to 3 stars realms of the second Pengu heaven, all of whom were gold immortals. And Bo Yunting himself was an expert of the 6 stars realm of the second Pengu heaven. The reinforcements sent by Yu Mu for his only grandson were led by Yu Huai. Apart from Yu Huai, there were only 9 of them, but they were all sun oracles secretly cultivated by the Yu clan in Liangzhu. The strongest oracle had 7 golden suns embroidered on his sleeve. With the reinforcements hiding outside Ningbo City, High Province had become a huge death trap. Chapter 600. A large sheet of divine flame of order burst out from Wuqi's palms, bursting out from his eyes and mouth. Purple and green flames burst out from every pore on his body. Under the control of Wuqi's enormous divine will, the flame was gradually compressed into a fireball the size of a wicker basket in front of him. The flame here had almost materialized, flickering with the colors of purple and green, looking like mercury. A tiny silver halo emerged between Wuqi's brows, transforming into a little shark about an inch long. The arrows used during the training were not attached with any runes, but during the war, the various vicious runes attached to the arrows were enough to give even top-grade Heaven Immortals a headache. If an ordinary Heaven Immortal was hit by more than 3 arrows at the same time, his defensive immortal item would be completely destroyed, along with his immortal body and immortal soul. Before his voice could fade away, the door of the secret chamber was hammered loudly by someone, followed by a loud, burly voice. There was no need for Wuxia to do anything. As the saying goes, spirit weapons were created by the heaven and earth, and Wuxia had used all natural spirit items to forge this weapon, as well as the soul of the green dome shark as its item spirit. As Wuxia gave a light palm strike and a soft cry, the rainbow light flickered a few times, then vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a magnificent silver glow that began to spin rapidly around Wuxia. A long, sharp hiss unique to the green dome shark rang out, followed by a deep rumble of stars and a sharp clanging of metals. A large sheet of starlight and mist burst out of the rainbow light ball. The light was very magical, as it could penetrate through the mud and rocks, directly reaching the outside of the secret chamber. Shocked, Wuxia hastily sprayed out a large sheet of Shen energy, completely enveloping the entire secret chamber. Fortunately, the Shen energy was very magical, and the flame could not penetrate through it. After spending months of hard work, the pearl was finally purified. Not daring to be careless, Wuxia threw the piece of star jade spirit gold he obtained from Blackfish Immortal Market in Mu Province into the divine flame of order. The fist-sized star jade spirit gold melted very quickly. This kind of extraterrestrial godly metal had absolutely no impurities. After being tempered by stars for countless years, what impurities could still exist? In just a few breaths of time, the star jade spirit gold had turned into a ball of liquid beads that sparkled with rainbow light. 200 fire soul catapults, 10,000 dragon hunting crossbows, 10,000 strong bows, and a large number of arrows, as well as a large number of armors, bone talismans, and other war tools had cost Yu Miao all his wealth. All the wealth Wuxia had given Yu Miao when he led the army to wipe out Mount Moon Gazing had been invested into these weapons with amazing lethality. In this way, 90% of the blood in his body was forced out, and a large amount of blood turned into runes that merged with the star jade spirit chi. When all his blood vessels had dried up, and all his internal organs had withered due to the lack of blood supply, he finally felt the intimate connection between the ball of liquid and his divine soul, just like how a mother and a baby shared a strong bond. 10,000 soldiers stood on the newly built drill ground in Ningbo City, lined up in a square formation that was 6 miles wide and 100 feet thick. 1,000 soldiers in the first row held 30 pickle bows and knocked arrows on the bowstrings. Then, following the orders of the supervising officers, they raised their hands and shot the arrows into the sky at a 45-degree angle. A continuous rain of arrows shot out, tearing through the air, and emitting a soul-stirring sound of breaking through the air. Beside these 10,000 soldiers, another 10,000 soldiers were wearing heavy armor and holding huge crossbows in their hands. Under the command of the supervising officer, they shot out wave after wave of arrows. The crossbows they were holding were also secret weapons of the human race, with an astonishing force of 210 pickle, enough to shoot specially made arrows dozens of miles away. Wuxia smiled proudly as he swallowed all the Shen energy in the secret chamber, rose slowly to his feet, and cried out in a low voice, "Now that I have a spirit weapon, who can let me test it?" Reverend Yao Yu's pearl had been refined to the size of a fist, hovering in the fireball and emitting a faint silvery green light. The strange phenomena in the pearl were constantly changing, with countless vague patterns of stars spinning rapidly. Wuxia did not hesitate to consume his blood essence and energy essence to use the divine flame of order to completely remove some of the restrictive spells Reverend Yao Yu had carelessly placed in the pearl, and then restored it to its original state with chaotic energy, turning it from an acquired spirit artifact into a supreme treasure with an innate aura. Because of these weapons and the reinforcements outside the city, Wuxia and Yumu had made up their minds, and they no longer took the provocation of Myriad Immortal Alliance seriously. Yumu handled his daily affairs leisurely, singing and dancing to his heart's content every day. He seemed to be enjoying his life as a prefecture overseer. With a sway of his body, The beast soul of the green dome shark, which he had collected a few months ago, flew out of his hand. At the same time, he had also separated a wisp of divine wool from his divine soul, and quietly injected it into the soul. The pale green soul of the green dome shark let out a sharp hiss as it gradually fused with the wisp of Wuqi's divine will. When the divine souls were done, Wuqi pointed a finger out, and the light ball transformed from the pearl, the liquid ball transformed from the star jade spirit gold, and the soul of the green dome shark quickly fused into one in the divine flame of order. Once again, the blade let out a crisp cry, then abruptly turned into a beam of starlight, and plunged into Wuqi's forehead. These crossbows were called Dragonslayer crossbows in the army of Du. They were specially designed by the skilled craftsmen of Du's army for soldiers who had just been recruited and had never cultivated before. They could give ordinary soldiers the ability to kill heaven immortals head-on. If it were not for the fact that they were too expensive to produce, Yumu would definitely have all 30,000 soldiers in Ningbo City equipped with them. Once such powerful crossbows with amazing lethality were formed into a large scale, even gold immortals would not dare to fight head-on against an army of human soldiers. They would be a great help for the human race to dominate Panga continent. Your Excellency, the scouts of Myriad Immortal Alliance have clashed with our patrols. In a corner of the drill ground, the last 10,000 soldiers were carefully handling 200 strange-shaped war machines that looked like heavy artillery, but had black, translucent, triangular crystal barrels. These war machines were called Fire Soul Destroyer, crafted by the master craftsmen of Du dynasty. When they were inlaid with enough immortal stones, they could unleash the strongest fire divine thunder, which was equivalent to the strike of a top-tier heaven immortal, at a frequency of one shot every 10 minutes. Wuqi breathed out a mouthful of foul air, then lightly patted the colorful light ball in front of him and cried out softly, "My treasure, you've been planning for so many days. When are you going to show yourself if not now?" An enormous power of stars spread out from the rune formation formed from blood. Wuqi pointed his finger out, causing the rune formation to shoot whistling into the divine flame of order, fusing with the ball of liquid that was emitting a rainbow glow. After that, a drop of blood dripped out from between his brows once again, forming a more complicated rune formation. After a while, he sent it into the liquid ball once again. Suddenly, a slit appeared between Wuqi's brows, from which drops of golden blood kept dripping out. Under the control of his powerful divine will, the blood turned into numerous runes the size of soybeans. Thousands of runes intertwined with each other, turning into a rapidly spinning rune ball in the air. Then, Wuqi cast an incantation on the rune. Suddenly, tiny wisps of starlight shot out from the pearl in the divine flame of order, and shone onto the runes. The runes formed by the golden blood mixed with the silver starlight, and immediately, a magnificent rain of light burst out. Deep rumbling noises could be vaguely heard in the air, as if there were countless stars wheeling around Wuqi. If used properly, 200 fire soul catapults were more than enough to form an endless destructive firepower. Not even an army of several dozens of high-tier heaven immortals could withstand the destructive power of 200 fire soul catapults. Even a lower-tier gold immortal would have no choice but to resist with an immortal item when encountering such an insane defensive firepower, and could only wait for the immortal stones to run out before they could destroy these freakishly big guys. Star Shark. Wuqi stared at the huge, oddly shaped blade and said in a deep voice, "Your name is Star Shark." After handing over the task of training 30,000 newly recruited soldiers to the warriors of scouting office, Wuqi went into a secluded cultivation in the military court. The pearl, which had shrunk to the size of a fist, no longer contained any impurities, only a wisp of the purest energy essence. There was a vague connection between the energy essence and the stars in the sky. Even during the day, it could extract a wisp of energy from the sun for its own use. The illusions of the stars were the projections of the stars in the sky in the pearl. The power of the pearl now was many times stronger than when it was in Reverend Yao Yu's hand. The reason why the human race was able to firmly occupy Panga continent was not only because they were the masters of heaven and earth chosen by the heavenly Tao, and because they were blessed by the heavenly Tao, but also because of their formidable military strength. Even though these ordinary soldiers who had just been recruited by Wuxia and had never practiced any cultivation technique, as long as they had bows and arrows in their hands, they could pose a threat to heaven immortals. Each crossbow was engraved with complicated runes and embedded with energy stones the size of goose eggs. With the help of these runes, the soldiers who controlled the crossbows could easily load the crossbows, and the effort they had to spend would never exceed that of the 10,000 comrades who used 30 pickle bows. As a result, they were able to continuously shoot out arrows like those soldiers with strong bows. Within the silver light, a strangely shaped blade that had no handle was indescribably thin, tens of thousands of times thinner than light. It was 12 feet long, shaped like a huge shark that was leaping in the air, and was letting out a resounding cry of joy. The treasured blade was so thin that it was almost transparent. However, if one looked carefully, one would find that the inside of the blade was filled with layers upon layers of reflections of countless stars. There were also trillions of runes entwined within the blade. When the treasured blade moved, these runes and stars seemed to wander freely within the blade as if they were alive. With a flip of his hand, Wuxia fished out a dozen immortal stones, then opened his mouth and took a deep breath, causing all the immortal energy in them to rush into his body. The benefits of the innate chaotic spirit body were immediately apparent. The immortal energy flowed rapidly through his meridians and blood vessels, quickly turning into new blood and filling his entire body. With these things, plus the 30,000 soldiers who were being trained, the military strength of Sea Region had increased by countless times. If the union of 10,000 immortals only sent a small team of immortals to raid Sea Region, it was doomed to be a one-way trip. If Myriad Immortal Alliance dared to send a large force to attack High Province, Bo Yunting, Yu Huai, and the others, who had already come to help, would definitely give them a heavy blow and make them regret coming to High Province. The first wave of 1,000 arrows was released. The force of the 30 pickle bows had sent the specially made arrows thousands of meters into the air. Then they shot forward with the help of the wind. Then came the second wave of arrows, the third wave of arrows, the fourth wave of arrows. 10,000 soldiers were divided into 10 rows, and under the loud orders of the supervising officers, arrows were shot out in an endless stream, turning into a dark curtain of death. Chapter 601. 12 corpses were lying in a row on the drill ground of Ningbo City. They were clean without a trace of blood, and each had a very thin wound on the left and right temple, as well as the heart. It was these 3 wounds that took the lives of these soldiers. All the soldiers who were training in the drill ground had rushed to the city wall, and the defensive mechanism of Ningbo City had been fully activated. A layer of grayish-white mist pervaded the wilderness about 100 miles away from the city wall. Vaguely, some strange figures could be seen moving amidst the mist. They looked like humans, but if one took a closer look, one would find that they were actually twisting humanoid shadows. This mist was the first layer of the defensive mechanism of Ningbo City, the weeping of 100 ghosts of the Yellow Spring. There were only about 100 soldiers led by Huang Liang on the drill ground. When Wu Qi arrived with a few armored soldiers, Huang Liang was lying on top of a corpse like a hound, his nose twitching rapidly and making a clear, audible gasp. His fingers were swiftly stroking the corpse inch by inch. Judging by his rapt attention, those who did not know him would think that Huang Liang was a pervert who liked corpses. Wu Qi strode up to Huang Liang and asked in a low voice, "What did you find?" Huang Liang raised his head. His usual wretchedness and slipperiness had vanished without a trace, replaced by a surprising seriousness and solemnity. All of them were killed in an instant, almost without being able to fight back, he said in a deep voice. There is no smell of blood on their weapons, which shows that they did not hurt the enemy. All the blood in their bodies has been drained and filled with a strange potion. The sound of footsteps rang out as Yumu, who had received the news, hurried over with a large group of officials from High Province. Yumu happened to hear Huang Liang's autopsy report, and he snapped. All the scouting teams are led by at least one general of the first star realm of the first Panga heaven. How could they be killed before they could even send back a signal? Is everyone's injury the same? When Huang Liang was about to say something, a sharp and unpleasant ringing of a copper bell suddenly came from the distant mountains. The ringing of the copper bell was like an all-piercing into everyone's eardrums. Except for Wuxia, who was far more powerful than everyone else, the others could not help but cover their ears and squat down in discomfort. The ear-piercing sound of the bell rang out continuously. The 12 corpses lying on the ground suddenly moved and bounced up from the ground. Their claws were bent like hooks, and they ruthlessly tore at the living people around them. Apart from the fact that the 12 corpses had their blood drained and their skin turned as white as snow, everything else seemed normal. But as soon as the bell rang, the 12 corpses suddenly shriveled up. Their skin tightly wrapped around their dried muscles, and the lines of muscles could be clearly seen under the skin. Their originally snow-white skin had turned into a wretched green, and their suddenly opened eyes had also turned into a frightening crimson color. Their claws had also turned into iron hooks, and their pitch-black claws carried a pungent stench. It was obvious that they had been poisoned. "How dare you?" Wuxia snorted coldly and stamped his foot. The ground of the drill ground, which was paved with boulders, rippled like water, and a shockwave spread out in all directions. The others only felt their feet go soft, and then nothing else. However, the 12 zombies who had suddenly sprung up were swept by the shockwave, and the bones below their waists made a series of cracking noises, while the bones in their legs were completely shattered. With their legs broken, the 12 zombies fell to the ground at the same time, waving their arms wildly and letting out roars from their mouths. "Someone is using the art of refining zombies right in front of us." Wuxia laughed in a deep voice. Suddenly, a large cloud of grayish-white mist gushed out from his palms. Accompanied by shrill ghost howls, the mist was set ablaze, and a green ghost fire wrapped around Wuqia's palms. The flesh on his palms had turned into a strange green and transparent state, but the bones underneath were clearly visible, emitting an evil black light. "Yo, the nether ghost soul captivating palm has already reached the level of Mahayana? Tanlang, we did not choose the wrong person. Cultivating both body and magic is indeed a wonderful thing." Large sheets of gray mist and green flame burst out from Wuqia's palms. As he was about to strike the 12 zombies, a deep, hoarse, and unpleasant voice suddenly rang out. Yu Huai, who was clad in a long black robe and wrapped in a black cloth from head to toe, strode over with a few men who were also clad in black cloaks. While walking, he kept praising Wuxia, saying that a talent who cultivated both body and magic was really rare. Wuxia smiled faintly, shook his head and said, "Your Excellency Yu Huai, you flatter me. How could the people of Myriad Immortal Alliance use such a petty trick? Tanlang just wants to teach them a lesson." Yu Huai laughed coldly and said, "Of course a lesson must be taught. However, the nether ghost soul captivating palm is more effective when used on a living person, but it is still a little lacking when used to scheme against someone from afar. Since it is an art of corpse control, I think it's better to let Lao Tzu teach them a lesson." With a shake of his hand, Wuxia retracted the nether ghost soul captivating palm, and looked curiously at Yu Huai. In the mansion of Yu Clan, Yu Huai had been hiding in his own great hall, and refining 108 fiend corpses. It was a forbidden art of Yu Clan, which showed that Yu Huai was very proficient in spells related to zombies. As he said, the nether ghost soul captivating palm Wuxia had learned in recent days could cause severe damage to a living person, but when used to curse someone, its power was very ordinary. Yu Huai would be the one to show his trick, and let Wuxia see what kind of powerful trick he had to scheme against someone. The ringing of the bell in the distance grew more and more urgent, as if the person who rang the bell was very impatient to get these zombies to attack someone. But, as the legs of these zombies were all broken, they could not stand up at all. They could only roll and crawl on the ground, and did not have the strength to hurt someone. Yu Huai came in front of the 12 zombies and let out a few strange laughs. Suddenly, a large plume of dense black mist gushed out of his black cloak. Like a living creature, the black mist quickly enveloped the 12 zombies and crawled into their 7 orifices. The 12 zombies stiffened abruptly, and their bodies gradually floated up into the air, quickly leaning against each other in midair. In Wuqia's astonished gaze, these zombies fused with each other like water droplets, gradually forming a pitch-black body that was as tall as an ordinary man. Pulling out a pitch-black bone knife, Yu Huai came in front of the floating body, and recited a few incantations in a low voice. He stabbed the knife hard into the center of the zombie's brows, then pierced the zombie's heart, lower abdomen, ribs, and other vital parts with the bone knife. After stabbing the zombie 18 times in total, Yu Huai smiled sinisterly and casually slapped the top of the zombie's head with his palm. With a swoosh, the zombie disappeared without a trace. Almost at the same time, a tragic scream was suddenly heard coming from the mountains in the distance. Dozens of sword beams shot into the sky from the mountains, charging menacingly in the direction of Ningbo City. The scream had been coming from the mountains, rising high into the clouds and going on endlessly. Yu Huai laughed strangely and said, "A healthy immortal suddenly has the flesh and blood of 12 zombies in his body, and hidden in them are the eggs of the nether butterfly, which can only be found in the yellow spring. When the larvae hatch, they feed on his flesh and blood, and it will take them 3 days and 3 nights to devour him along with his soul. Hee, how dare you show off such a petty trick in front of Lao Tzu?" Wu Qi sucked in a cold breath. He imagined that an immortal suddenly had the flesh and blood of 12 zombies inside his body, and countless eggs were hatching, feeding on the flesh and blood to break out of their shells. It was a cruel torture. A chill ran up and down his spine, and he became even more fearful of the various terrible mystic arts of the Directorate of Celestials. Since Yu Huai had such a trick, Yu Mu might have even fiercer curses. He had to be extra careful, or he would not even know when he would suffer a great loss. Dozens of sword beams flew out of Ningbo City, and then came a sharp female voice that sounded like steel needles. "This is outrageous. How could you plot against fellow Taoist Lao Yin with that evil fiend technique? Poor fellow Taoist Lao Yin, he died so miserably. All of you are guilty, and you will be punished by the heaven." Wu Qi grinned, then cupped his fist and bowed to Yu Huai. "Your Excellency, Yu Huai is indeed an unpredictable prodigy. Now that those scumbags from Myriad Immortal Alliance have come to our door, I'll bring my men and give them a head-on blow." Yu Huai waved his hand nonchalantly and said, "Go, just go. They are just a group of heaven immortals. Tan Lang, you can totally defeat them all by yourself, and you don't even need the honorable elders to do anything. Take your time and play with them. Let's see how much Myriad Immortal Alliance can spend for the sake of High Province." While Yu Huai was talking to Wu Qi, on a mountain 900 miles away from Ningbo City, a black stone chair was placed upright on the top of the mountain. A man clad in a black linen robe, and wearing a black jade crown on his head, his face expressionless and his body emanating a deathly aura, like that of a zombie, was sitting steadily on the stone chair. He looked in the direction of Ningbo City without saying a word, and behind him stood 36 generals clad in heavy black armors, who were standing in a row. From a distance, he saw Wu Qi leading his men to the top of the city wall, and arguing with those heaven immortals hovering in midair, cultivating both fleshly body and magic. "I can't believe Yu Mu has found such a good seedling. Is his name Tan Lang? Pay more attention to him, and if possible, promote him. The Yu clan in Liangzhu is already under my control, and this Tan Lang is now one of us." A general behind him answered in a low, muffled voice, then asked in a deep voice, "Your Excellency, the sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance was severely wounded by Lao Wang, and he is now searching for spirit herbs to save his life. 13 of the 18 elders of Divine Hall were seriously wounded by Lao Wang's scheme, so they should be hiding and recuperating now. Why are they fanning the flames and stirring up trouble?" The man frowned. After pondering for a long time, he slowly raised his right hand and said softly, "They must have a goal. Apart from High Province, Myriad Immortal Alliance is stirring up disputes in over 200 ninth-grade provinces at the same time. No matter what they want to do, we just need to kill them all with the strongest force. Pass down my order. All the soldiers must not slack off." The 36 generals behind him responded in unison. Just when the black-clothed man was about to give some orders, a wild gust of wind suddenly rose from the ground. A fierce-looking man, who was dressed in a black tight suit and only had his eyes exposed, rushed out of the gust and respectfully knelt down before the black-clothed man. "Your Excellency, the new celestial ambassador sent by the celestial court to Diyu's imperial city has arrived." The man looked up and asked curiously, "Which celestial lord is it? Or, Is it an immortal king who has come to the mortal realm? It is. The immortal king conferred by the celestial court, King of Han, Liu Bang. The burly man answered in a deep voice. The man clenched his fists and crushed the armrests of the stone chair. Liu Bang? He cried out through clenched teeth. The burly man did not dare to look up and said urgently. And the three heroes around Liu Bang are Zhang Liang, Han Xian and Xiao He, three celestial lords, who are his deputies. The man smiled grimly, then suddenly turned into a plume of black smoke and flew up into the sky, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Chapter 602. Ningbo City. On the city wall, Wuxia had also donned a set of armor made of leather. The inside of the pale green armor was lined with a leather armor as thick as a finger, and the outside was covered with a layer of shell that was half a finger thick. It was unknown what kind of large beetle it came from. The armor wrapped tightly around Wuqi's body, but it did not hinder his movement at all. On the contrary, when he walked, there was a breeze following him, which could greatly enhance Wuqi's fighting strength. The armor was also a fine product purchased by Yumu through private channels. Although it did not have any decorative patterns and looked very inconspicuous, it was actually crafted by a master craftsman in Liangzhu. It had an amazing defensive strength that could withstand a full-force blow from an upper-tier heaven immortal wielding an immortal item. Before the immortal stones embedded in the armor ran out of immortal energy, no heaven immortal below the 12th tier could cause any harm to Wuqi. Holding a dragon-hunting crossbow in his hand, Wuqi cocked a bone arrow engraved with powerful corrosive runes onto the bowstring, and looked at the heaven immortals hovering about 1 mile above him with a smile. Just now, he and the group of heaven immortals sent out by Myriad Immortal Alliance had been quarreling for a full hour, leaving dozens of heaven immortals speechless, and their faces livid with rage because of Wuqi's rich imagination and almost unimaginable words. All kinds of vicious, mocking, insidious, and obscene curses from the internet on Earth had greatly broadened the horizons of the generals and soldiers around Wuqi. If not for the fact that the dozens of heaven immortals in midair had not attained the body of a heaven immortal, and had no cardiovascular disease, 2 or 3 of them would have been cursed to death by Wuqi. A pretty female immortal, who was dressed in a palace dress and had 2 large peonies on her head like a matchmaker, was so angry that her eyes darted from side to side. She pointed at Wuqi and snapped, "I don't want to talk nonsense with you, you little man. You have a sharp tongue, and I'm ashamed of my inferiority. If you are a real man, come out and fight me." Wuqi smiled, then waved at the female immortal and said, "Let's go out and have a showdown. Woman, do you think I'm stupid? So many of you are waiting outside the city like fiends. Do you want me to go out and let you attack me?" The female immortal paused. She glanced at her companion and frowned. "Fairy, I guarantee that if you dare to come out, no one will attack you." Wuqi sighed softly. He crooked his finger at the female immortal and laughed out loud. "Then, Fairy, please enter the city and fight me on the drill ground. I swear on my character that I will never let my subordinates attack you." The female immortal's expression changed slightly. How would she have the guts to enter the city and fight it out with Wuqi? Not only the female immortal, even the other immortals had an unsightly expression on their faces as they glanced at Ningbo City, whose defensive strength was worlds apart from before. Especially the numerous archers and crossbowmen on the city wall, as well as the 200 huge fire soul catapults. Such a defensive strength was not something that dozens of heaven immortals could break. After pondering for a moment, the female immortal's tone suddenly became very weak. "Why do you have to be so hostile? As long as High Province releases fellow Taoist Yao Yu and his people, Myriad Immortal Alliance is not willing to go to war for no reason." Wuqi shook his head and said indifferently, "Don't use Yao Yu as an excuse anymore. That Taoist and his people are destined to become sacrifices to the ghost god. According to the law of Diyu, Yao Yu has a bad record, and what he has done has greatly violated the law of Diyu. If I don't punish him severely with torture, will you, the itinerant cultivators, still take me, the human emperor of Diyu, seriously?" The female immortal and her companions looked at each other, then softened their tone at the same time, and chattered with Wuqi. They did not curse or challenge him. Instead, they put on a calm posture and tried to reason with Wuxia. The female immortal even played the emotional card. She told Wuxia in a choked voice that there were many young children among Reverend Yao Yu's people. And if they were all sacrificed to the ghost god, didn't Wuxia think it was a little inhumane? Wuxia frowned and exchanged a puzzled glance with Yumu, who was standing next to him. These immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance did not match the aggressive manner of the 3 black-clothed Taoist emissaries a few days ago. Were the immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance so easy to talk to? Not to mention that they had just killed a team of scouts from Ningbo City, and they did not show any mercy when they killed them. Could it be that they were frightened by Yu Huai's cruel means? Were they stunned by Wuqi's nasty curses? Or were they stunned by the city's defense? Dozens of heaven immortals hovered in midair, chattering like a swarm of flies as they kept blaming the officials of High Province for the destruction of Mount Moon Gazing. They had deliberately raised their voices, and their voices spread through the city's defense, so that the hundreds of thousands of people in the city could hear them clearly. First, they begged with gentle voices, but when they saw the indifferent look on Wuqi and Yuzong's faces, their tone changed from begging to threatening. Suddenly, they became stern, pointing fingers at Wuqi and Yumu, telling them with the most direct adjectives that if they did not release Reverend Yao Yu's people, Myriad Immortal Alliance would definitely wipe out High Province, killing everyone in Ningbo City. Wuqi still paid no attention to these heaven immortals. If they had put up a desperate stance, Wuqi would have been interested in sending them to reincarnation. But although these heaven immortals were aggressive at first, they became as weak as quails in a storm, and Wuqi did not even have the thought of bullying them. Although the tone of these heaven immortals was stern, Wuqi could tell that behind the stern mask, there was a clear lack of confidence. If Wuqi rushed out of the city's defense and attacked these heaven immortals, as long as he killed one of them, the others would definitely flee in different directions, and he would have to chase them all over the world. That would be troublesome. But these heaven immortals did not attack, nor did they flee. Instead, they just stood there, muttering under their breath. This was really offensive. What were they trying to do? With a wry smile, Wuqi gestured at the dozens of heaven immortals and said, "Forget it, it's not worth wasting my breath on you. All military officers with a cultivation base above the first Panga heaven, listen up. Charge out with me and kill all these bastards." Among the private guards brought by Yumu, dozens of military officers with a cultivation base strong enough to fight against heaven immortals answered with a thunderous roar. One after another, they crushed bone talismans to enchant themselves with various defensive mechanisms, then stepped on purple clouds and rushed toward the heaven immortals with Wuqi. Looking down from this height, even the largest ocean on Pangu continent was only the size of a mung bean. This was the outer heavenly realm of Pangu continent. Countless shooting stars were streaking across the sky, and from time to time, large patches of aurora could be seen. 3 immortals clad in golden Taoist robes hovered in the sky on clouds, their powerful divine sense locking down Ningbo City. "Why so careful?" said one of them discontentedly. "It's just a 9th grade province. Why should we be so careful? Even if they have an ambush, how can they hurt us? Let those good-for-nothings waste their breath and disgrace Myriad Immortal Alliance for no reason. It doesn't matter if they lose face, as long as they don't lose their lives." Another golden-robed Taoist said coolly, "The sovereign is severely wounded now. If we are not careful, we may be killed by King Yangqiu's army. We only have one life, so we'd better be cautious." "You're right. What we've done this time will surely shake Diyu and the Celestial Court. If we're not careful enough, it would be a light punishment for us to be smashed to pieces." The last Taoist took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Look, Ningbo City is densely covered with armored soldiers and all kinds of city defense equipment. It seems that they are well prepared. But such a force may be useful against some heaven immortals. But against us? Ha." The 3 Taoists burst into laughter. They could not help but shake their heads as they watched Wuqi and the dozens of military officers beat those heaven immortals, and make them flee with their hands covering their heads. As soon as Wuqi made his move, he unleashed a vast sheet of Shun energy that blanketed the surrounding void. Under his control, the military officers could see those heaven immortals clearly, But the heaven immortals were so confused that they could not even tell which direction they were facing, and their overall strength had been reduced by at least 60%. These heaven immortals did not have very high cultivation bases, and they did not have any powerful immortal items. Therefore, in less than a quarter of an hour, Wuxia and his men had killed all the heaven immortals except for 3 female immortals. The 3 female immortals were captured alive by Yu Miao's guards, who all had strange smiles on their faces. Wuxia knew that female immortals or cultivators were very popular among the nobles in Diyu, and everyone was proud to have a few female immortals or cultivators as their slaves. The 3 female immortals all had the cultivation base of 30th tier, and they were all good-looking. It was a good idea to keep them for Yu Miao's use, and if he sold them, he could get at least a few large flying ships. Wuxia paid no attention to what these guards had done. It was the unspoken rule of Penghu continent, and he did not have the consciousness of being a savior. He just wondered why the Alliance had sent these unruly heaven immortals here. They had even killed 12 soldiers of Ningbo City, and tried to trap Wuxia and his company with the art of controlling corpses. But the cultivation base of these heaven immortals was too weak, and they did not have any fighting strength. So what were they doing here? Even if they were here to spy on the enemy, did they really need to sacrifice dozens of heaven immortals? High up in the sky, 3 golden-robed Taoists put a jade slip that could record images into their sleeves at the same time. One of them sighed and said, "We have all the evidence. Hai Province has innocently abducted our allies. And our allies are so indignant that they have gathered in Ningbo City to demand the return of the captives. But Ningbo City has brazenly killed 57 of our allies and captured 3 alive. We have no choice but to retaliate." Another golden-robed Taoist nodded and said, "When they attacked just now, I paid attention to the surroundings, and there was no unusual movement in or outside Ningbo City. If we strike now, we can catch them off guard. Even if there is an ambush, we can still escape smoothly." The last golden-robed Taoist nodded heavily. The 3 of them exchanged a glance, then stood in 3 positions and unleashed their gold immortal energy at the same time. A meteor with a diameter of 30,000 miles swept past them, but was forcibly imprisoned by the gold immortal energy. Accompanied by a dull rumble, the meteor was compressed to 100 miles in diameter. The 3 golden-robed Taoists waved their hands casually, and the meteor suddenly turned into a beam of strong light, whistling down from the sky and falling to the ground. The 3 golden-robed Taoists followed closely behind, performing incantation gestures and reciting spells with both hands, laying out layer after layer of powerful restrictive spells on the meteor. Suddenly, a small sun appeared in the sky, illuminating millions of miles around Ningbo City. Chapter 603. In just 2 or 3 seconds, the 3 gold immortals had deployed 36,000 layers of powerful defensive spells on the tiny planet. The 3 gold immortals pushed the planet all the way to the sky less than 3,000 miles away from Ningbo City, and only then did they suddenly flee. From the time they began to attack until the planet was less than 3,000 miles away from Ningbo City, only 3 seconds had passed in total. As the 3 gold immortals had expected when they were discussing in the sky, they pushed the star down toward Ningbo City. The sudden appearance of the star and the strong light attracted everyone's attention, and they fled from behind the star. No one could detect them with their divine sense, and no one tried to stop them. Perhaps the black-robed man sitting on the stone chair on the mountain had the overall strength to stop them. But when he heard that the new celestial ambassador sent by the celestial court to Liangzhu was Liu Bang, the king of Han, and his 3 heroes, he lost control of his mind, transformed into a wisp of black smoke and fled into the distance. After the enigmatic black-robed man left, the 36 generals under him were also attracted by the strong light, so no one could find the whereabouts of the 3 golden-robed Taoists. Wuxia stared blankly at the planet that came crashing down from the sky with a threatening aura. He felt his body stiffen like a frog being stared at by a cobra. Wuxia's muscles tightened, and he wanted to flee as fast as he could, but his muscles were so stiff that he could not move. He could only watch as the planet approached inch by inch with an aura of destruction. The planet, which was 30,000 miles in diameter, was compressed to only 100 miles in size, and was falling straight down from the extremely high void. Its weight and impact were enough to kill all living beings below the realm of gold immortal in an instant. Even with Wuqi's current peak rank, 1 physical cultivation base, he would not dare to face this whistling star head-on. What was worse was that the 3 gold immortals had cast 36,000 restrictive spells on the planet, which consumed 80% of their immortal energy. It was the equivalent of 3 gold immortals unleashing their full power on the star. Even those who were as strong as the 3 gold immortals would not be willing to fight the star head-on. Among the 36,000 layers of restrictive spells, several thousand of them were special immortal techniques that could absorb energy from the outside world. As the star fell straight down from the sky, the astral wind, heavenly fire, aurora, thunderclouds, xianbing, magnetic force, and many other energies along the way were constantly absorbed by these restrictive spells. The star, which was already extremely compressed and had a density dozens of times greater than Mercury, had absorbed a tremendous amount of energy and become as hard as diamond. Even an ordinary upper-grade immortal item would not be as strong as it. The aura of a gold immortal, coupled with the aura of destruction brought by the falling star, had made Wuqi, an expert with a peak-level fleshly body, stiff and unable to move, let alone the others. Yuzong, as well as all the soldiers and civilians in Ningbo City, stood stiffly where they were, staring blankly at the rapidly approaching star. In a great hall next to the drill ground, 9 oracles of Yu clan, whose sleeves were embroidered with different numbers of golden suns, up to 7 at most, rushed out of the great hall with Yu Huai, whose body was stiff and whose body was drenched in cold sweat. The 9 oracles glanced at the falling star at the same time, and Chi-Chi let out a long, furious roar. The all-out attack of 3 gold immortals, who had been accumulating power for a long time, made the 9 oracles who were strong enough to fight against gold immortals panic for a moment. They were different from immortals. The power of immortals resided in their bodies, and they could unleash powerful immortal spells with a casual wave of their hands, which had a terrible power that could split mountains and split the earth. On the other hand, the oracles of Diyu's Directorate of Celestials mostly borrowed the power of the outside world, the power of ghosts and deities, and all kinds of holy spirits. They needed a certain amount of time to unleash their strongest power. If they were given enough time, they could instantly kill immortals of the same level as them with all kinds of strange curses and mystic arts. But in a head-on confrontation, immortals could also kill an unguarded oracle in an instant. Of the 9 oracles who escorted Yu Huai out of the Great Hall, the strongest was a 7 Suns oracle, whose cultivation base was comparable to a 5th-tier gold immortal. However, that was after he had made sufficient preparations and borrowed all the power of ghosts and deities he worshipped. His current cultivation base was only comparable to a 17th-tier gold immortal, and his fleshly body was extremely weak. He did not have the courage to resist the falling star. But after all, they still had the overall strength of the lowest-level gold immortal. Although they could not resist the falling star, they were more than capable of escaping. Amidst Yu Huai's sharp rebuke, the 9 oracles escorted him and sped up the city wall in a blur. Dozens of wisps of black smoke shot out of their sleeves, which rolled up Wuqi, Yu Miao, and the other important figures of High Province, as well as the elite guards of Yu clan's private army, who were standing stiffly on the wall. Then they turned into a gray beam and sped away. The power of a gold immortal was not to be underestimated. Roaring furiously, the 9 oracles brought hundreds of people and flew tens of thousands of miles away in a flash. A muffled rumble rang out from afar as the small star hit Ningbo City. An intense bluish-purple light dominated the world. Everyone felt as if their bodies had become transparent. The bluish-purple light passed through everyone's bodies, bringing intense pain to their internal organs. Except for those with strong fleshly bodies like Wuqi, who could resist the power of the light, everyone, including Oracle Chi-Chi and Yu Huai, coughed up blood. As soon as the blood came out of their mouths, it immediately turned into smoke and drifted away. Their body fluids were boiling. If it were not for the fact that they had the power of ghosts and deities, which made their bodies far stronger than ordinary mortals, the strong light that came from tens of thousands of miles away was enough to kill everyone except for Wuqi and the other generals. Even the 9 powerful oracles of the Yu clan could not withstand the attack of the strong light. The oracles of the Directorate of Celestials still had the fleshly bodies of mortals, and their power came from ghosts and deities. They were extremely old, and their fleshly bodies were on the verge of decay. The strong light pierced through their bodies and caused terrible damage to them. All of them had lost decades to hundreds of years of their lifespans because of the damage they had sustained. Originally, these oracles did not have much lifespan left, and now, they relied more on various spirit herbs to prolong their lifespan to support the vitality in their bodies. After losing so much of their lifespan, the 9 oracles cursed in unison. Towering resentment transformed into black ghosts and spread out from their bodies, carrying the crowd and fleeing into the distance at an even faster speed. In the blink of an eye after the first wave of strong light, a terrible bluish-purple shockwave, which contained countless destructive forces of nature, such as thunderbolts, xianbing, heavenly flame, aurora, magnetic force, and nether force, came rushing over. Wherever the shockwave passed, the earth turned into a desert. Mountains were razed to the ground, rivers and lakes dried up, and all the living beings along the way were crushed to powder. Even their souls were turned into nothingness by the natural force of the shockwave. In just the blink of an eye, Wuxia and the others had fled another 100,000 miles away. The few oracles of the Yu clan had finished reciting the incantation, and a huge celestial fiend god emerged over their bodies at the same time, emanating a dreadful aura. 9 gigantic celestial fiend gods raised their hands at the same time. Amidst a deep, muffled howl, sets of armors made of different materials, such as bone armors, stone armors, and scales, appeared on the bodies of Wuxia and the others. Shockwaves came sweeping over from behind, blotting the sky and blotting out the earth and sky, pulling Wuxia and his company into it. The group of several hundred men was swept away like a cluster of dandelions in a hurricane, unable to resist at all. Huge rocks kept slamming into their bodies, but the armors protected them, shattering all the rocks into dust and sand. Countless thunderbolts smashed on their bodies, and large balls of flame surrounded them. From time to time, cold and evil forces would come whistling over, and magnetic force, colorful aurora, and many other destructive forces would come smashing down. However, with the armors released by the 9 celestial fiend gods, although Wuxia and the others were dizzy from the impact, they did not suffer any actual harm. They tumbled and rolled in the frightening shockwave for the time it took to finish a pot of tea. But to Wuxia and the others, this short period of time felt like 10,000 years. Under the protection of the 9 celestial fiend gods, the group rushed out of the shockwave safely, and what came next was endless light and heat. The purple-red flame swirled around them, burning so fiercely that even the armors worn by Wuxia and the others could not withstand it. Many of the armors were cracking noisily and had many cracks on them. The 7 Suns priest roared. His old and shriveled body suddenly swelled up like a balloon. In an instant he regained his youth, his muscles became plump and smooth, and his hunched back straightened. He had transformed into an 8-foot-tall man in the prime of his life. Clenching his fists, the priest suddenly thrust one palm toward the sky and the other toward the ground, causing the surrounding void to tremble. He shouted, "Flames in the world should not be so hot." As the old oracle gave a loud cry, the power of law within 1,000 miles was slightly twisted. The purple-red flames were still there, but their temperature had dropped to only 30 to 40 degrees Celsius. Although it was scorching hot, it could no longer hurt Wuxia and the others. Distorting the laws was a power that only experts of Gold Immortal Realm could possess. The other 8 oracles had also struck out with all kinds of means. Relying on the protection of the 9 great oracles, Wuxia and the others managed to escape the fatal blow caused by the meteor. 2 hours later, Wuxia and the others returned to Ningbo City with their heads and faces covered in dust. There was no more Ningbo City in this world. The place where the city once stood had become a huge crater, 3,000 miles deep and more than 50,000 miles in diameter. The water of the Great Eastern Ocean was pouring into the crater, through a gap that was 10,000 miles wide. Everything in Ningbo City, the hundreds of thousands of civilians, the 30,000 new recruits, Yu Miao's 3,000 private guards, the middle and lower level officials in the city, and the large amount of armaments that Wuxia and Yu Miao had spent a lot of money to purchase were gone. Fortunately, the 5 counties of Hai Province were tens of thousands of miles away from Ningbo City. Although the impact of the meteor had caused some damage to them, there were not many casualties. Ningbo City, on the other hand, was completely destroyed. Wuqi's eyes were blazing with rage. He threw his head back and roared furiously, then threw a heavy punch down. The seawater that was pouring into the pit was pushed back, and the waves that were tens of thousands of miles long rose into the air, forming a huge water screen in the void. Myriad Immortal Alliance. I will uproot you and leave no one alive. Chapter 604. More than 2 months had passed since the destruction of Ningbo City, and the aftermath was still rolling across Zhong Province. On that day, the city was destroyed, and more than 1 million people were killed in the city and the surrounding towns. Putting aside the loss of civilians, 1 million people was nothing more than a drop of water in the vast ocean when compared to the 300 provinces ruled by Zhong Province. What was worse was the army of 100,000 soldiers hiding outside Ningbo City, personally led by Bo Yunting, the beloved son of Bo Zhongfu, the new prefecture overseer of Zhong Province. Except for Bo Yunting and the 12 second Pango Heaven generals under his command, the army of 100,000 was wiped out by the sudden attack of the stars. The army of 100,000 was not the local army of Zhong Province. After the case of Feng Lingling, the local army of Zhong Province had been ordered to disband, and all the soldiers had returned to their homeland to retire. These 100,000 elite soldiers were the private army that Bo Zhongfu had brought from the fief of his clan. The private army sent by his clan to secure his position as the prefecture overseer of Zhong Province. The private army of 100,000 was made of gold, and each of them had cost Bo Zhongfu an astronomical sum of money. As a result, the army of 100,000 was reduced to a wisp of smoke outside Ningbo City, and only a dozen generals were spared. Bo Zhongfu was furious, extremely furious. Before he became the prefecture overseer of Zhong Province, he was the confidant of the current human emperor, and had a very strong network of contacts in Liangzhu, the capital of Diyu. After his private army of 100,000 was wiped out, Bo Zhongfu sent a memorial to Liangzhu, which immediately shocked Diyu and Qiqi. A large number of experts and secret agents swarmed out of Yuxiong Plain, searching the world and hunting down the immortals and itinerant cultivators of the Alliance. In just over 2 months, the immortals of Ascending Immortal Hall and Hidden Immortal Hall had been fighting with the experts sent by Diyu dynasty all over Pangu continent, causing the sky to fall and the earth to crack. There was a faint hint of the legendary cataclysm. No one knew what had gotten into the myriad Immortal Alliance's mind. After the massacre in Ningbo City of Hai Province, they had set fires all over Pangu continent in just over 2 months. As a result, more than 200 lower-grade provinces were attacked by the same stars as the one in Hai Province. Only 13 of the cities were protected by experts, and they were lucky enough to escape the attack of the stars. The other 200 cities were completely razed to the ground. The Diyu dynasty became even more furious, and sent more experts to hunt down the immortals of the Union of 10,000 Immortals. It was even rumored that some imperial sinecures, who lived in seclusion in the imperial palace and had not shown their faces for many years, had sneaked out of Yuxiong Plain. Their targets were the elders and core members of Myriad Immortal Alliance's Divine Hall, and they had even fought and destroyed many places on Pangu continent. The situation was slightly out of control. No one knew why the immortals of Ascending Immortal Hall and Hidden Immortal Hall of the Union of 10,000 Immortals had gone crazy. Under the circumstances of being attacked by Diyu dynasty in all directions, they actually formed groups to attack the cities and towns of Diyu. On the other hand, the experts sent by Diyu dynasty began to attack indiscriminately after suffering a series of defeats. When the human emperor's edict was issued to the whole Pangu continent, all the provinces under the heaven swarmed into action, and their armies began to hunt down all itinerant cultivator powers in an orderly manner. For a moment, Pangu continent was engulfed in flames of war, rivers of blood flowed, and countless itinerant cultivators and demons were slaughtered. As soon as Diyu dynasty's huge war machine was activated, Myriad Immortal Alliance, and some other itinerant cultivator powers immediately suffered a heavy blow. But none of this had anything to do with Wuxia or High Province. In this storm, High Province was just a prelude. After Ningbo City was destroyed, no one paid any attention to High Province. While cursing, Yumu took a huge sum of money from Yumu and began to rebuild Ningbo City. The new city was built on the original site of Ningbo City. Like a living being, Pangu continent had a very strong ability to repair and heal itself. A huge crater, thousands of miles deep and 50,000 miles in diameter, was blasted out of Ningbo City, and the massive damage was completely healed in just 1 month. Although the terrain was very different from before, at least it was flat and fertile land, with only some scar-like mountain ranges and hills in some areas. The new Ningbo City was built on top of the old one. With Yu Miao's support, Yumu had secretly transported 5 million people from Zhong province to replenish the city. The newly built city was bound to be more prosperous than the old one. Wuxia did not care about these civil affairs. After selecting 30,000 young men from the newly transported immigrants and reorganizing the army of the military court, Wuxia packed them up and brought them to East Sea County, where they would be drilled by the elites of scouting office led by Yan Bugue. When the struggle between the Yu Dynasty and Myriad Immortal Alliance on Pangu continent was in full swing, the day Wuxia had been looking forward to finally arrived. On the 3rd day of the 9th month of the Yu Dynasty, the world was filled with a murderous aura, and it was a day of great calamity. On such a day, everything was inauspicious, and the only thing that mattered was sacrifice. Every year on the 3rd day of the 9th month, the imperial family of Diyu would go to the ancestral temple for a grand sacrificial ceremony, and many powerful clans and powers in Diyu would also hold their own blood sacrificial ceremonies. With the murderous aura, the void around Pangu continent would become fragile and unstable, allowing the ghosts and deities from the otherworldly realms to project stronger power onto the continent with greater ease. Offering sacrifices to these ghosts and deities on this day would also bring more benefits. Of course, the sacrificial offerings had to be properly selected, and they had to be the ones with the strongest intelligence and the most abundant blood energy. Only then could they win the favor of these ghosts and deities. What else could be the sacrificial offering with the strongest intelligence and the most abundant blood energy in the world besides human beings? Every year on the 3rd day of the 9th month, even though the human emperor had repeatedly forbidden the use of human beings as blood sacrifices, countless civilians were still secretly killed as sacrifices. At this time of the year, all the prisoners and exiled sinners in all the provinces and counties of Dayu would be wiped out. There were even underground trades, where these sinners who had committed serious crimes would be bought with a huge sum of money, just like buying pigs and dogs in the market. Wuxia had also bought a huge number of sacrifices. He had spent half of the money he had obtained from wiping out Mount Moon Gazing, buying 120,000 white horses, 120,000 black horses, 90,000 white cows, 90,000 black cows, 60,000 white sheep, and 60,000 black sheep. It took him 1.5 months just to buy these sacrifices. Fortunately, the land in Zhong province was fertile, with countless pastures and a large number of livestock for sale. Through Yumu's connections, Wuxia managed to buy so many livestock before the 3rd day of the 9th month, and transported them to the outskirts of East Sea City in time. A huge sacrificial altar was erected outside of East Sea City. The densely packed stone pillars were filled with animals that were about to be sacrificed. On the altar, thousands of cultivators from Reverend Yao Yu's clan were lying stiffly on the ground. His entire body was restrained by the immortal detaining needles, and he could not even move his eyeballs. His eyes were wide open, filled with fear and despair, and his lips were moving rapidly, but he could not make a single sound. Princess Zhonglu appeared in front of Reverend Yao Yu with Lord Xiansheng, Catfish Flood Dragon, and the others. Princess Zhonglu, who had inherited the Tao of Ancient God, would be the officiant of today's ceremony. When Reverend Yao Yu saw the true faces of Princess Zhonglu and the others, especially when he saw Gold Horn and Silver Horn, the 2 dragon pythons coiled around Wuqi's waist, his expression became very interesting. It was an indescribable mixture of fear, despair, anger, and resentment, and an expression that could only be produced after being carefully mixed with a deadly poison. Wuxia walked slowly up to Reverend Yao Yu, lowered his voice, and said with a smile, "This is the truth behind the destruction of Mount Moon Gazing. You shouldn't have messed with my wife. You shouldn't have messed with my brothers and friends. Rest in peace, for you will be the last to die." After a brief pause, Wuxia nodded with a smile and said, "Believe it or not, Myriad Immortal Alliance is going to war for you. Well, the war on Pangu continent is all because of you. I know you know that asking us to hand over you and your people is just an excuse. At least, Myriad Immortal Alliance is willing to use you as an excuse. You should feel very comforted and gratified, don't you think?" Shaking his head mockingly, Wuxia sighed and said in a low voice, "Those who belong to an organization are indeed arrogant and domineering. They are different from us." Reverend Yao Yu stared at Wuxia with a hint of expectation in his eyes. The complicated expression on his face had disappeared, replaced by a pleading look amidst despair. He tried his best to turn his eyes, trying to give Wuxia a wink. Wuxia turned to look at the few young children lying beside Reverend Yao Yu. They should be the youngest descendants of Reverend Yao Yu's clan. The corner of Wuxia's mouth twitched slightly as he took a deep breath. Looking at the gray sun in the sky, he said in a deep voice, "I'm sorry, but if I don't remove the roots, the weeds will grow again. I won't give your children the hope of avenging me in the future." With a deep smile on his face, Wuxia shook his head and said, "I've heard too many stories like this. If I don't remove the roots, I may die in the hands of your descendants in the future. So it is certain that your entire clan will be cut off. Perhaps, these few children around you have the aptitude to become primordial immortals? How can I take such a risk?" Reverend Yao Yu's eyes suddenly turned grayish-white like those of a dead fish, and all the vitality in his body vanished in an instant. He was still alive, but he had lost all his vitality. An earthy yellow murderous aura emerged out of thin air, and everyone could feel the vibration coming from the void. The void around Pangu continent gradually began to shake, and the spatial organization became weaker. When the blood sacrifice was used to summon the ghosts and deities, the energy required for them to come to Pangu continent was greatly reduced. When the sun rose to the center of the sky, the murderous aura reached its peak. The earthy yellow murderous aura pervaded the void, completely absorbing the sunlight. The third day of the 9th month of this year happened to be the day when the murderous aura would surge once every 60 years. The murderous aura in the world was 10,000 times greater than usual. On such a day, the common people of Pangu continent would hide in their homes and never go out to work. On the other hand, many of the powerful clans regarded this day as a gift from the heaven, and they would offer sacrifices that were 100 times more abundant than usual to the ghosts and deities. Wuxia, Lord Xiansheng, and the others retreated to the bottom of the altar, leaving Princess Zhonglu alone, clad in an oracle's robe, standing upright on the top of the altar. When the sunlight completely disappeared, Princess Zhonglu raised the bone knife in her hand and gently stabbed it into the void. Miserable howls rang out from all over the place as the hundreds of thousands of animals around the altar had their throats cut by an invisible force at the same time. Blood sprayed out, and a pungent smell rose into the sky. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.